Take attendance, Richard.
Sure. In attendance, I have Bach Huber, Ebert, Oniro, Munson, Shaw, and West. Absent Canor.
Okay, the first item of business is election of chair. And I'll start off by saying I don't care to be considered anymore for being the chair. And I'd like to nominate Jim as chair.
We'll second that.
Is there any discussion?
Talk,
Jim's willing?
I need to know about anybody else of interest. Nobody else of interest. I see a head nod.
Can you at least smile?
I'll accept it. I would accept that if that's the desire of the commission.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
It's all abstain, right?
Sure.
Jim is now the chair.
So does this happen today or is this
Yeah.
happen next month?
Yes. Yes.
So you take over the meeting.
Pretty long and hard for this. Okay, the next order of business, you good to go?
Yes.
Is election of vice chair. And I would like to propose and nominate Warren Gebert for vice chair.
Second. Warren, are you willing?
That's fine.
Okay.
Any other nominations? Hearing none. All in favor of Warren Gebert as vice chair, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And same is the word. Okay. I'm sorry to hear that Warren's stepping down, but he's only served for about 50 years or more, and I guess that's all he can ask for.
Only 46 as chair.
You're not leaving. Not leaving the commission, by the way. We've had this conversation.
You're the third chair.
Yeah, I know. Long line of
You asked
Precedence.
me the other day who was the first.
Who was the first?
I didn't remember his name, but then kicked in about an hour later, Bill Feist. And probably no one ever remember Bill Feist.
the
So
name rings a bell, but I can't picture who it is. Huh? Wolf Feist. Okay. Good to know. But my understanding is, Warren, you're still serving as on the commission for the rest of your term, whatever that is.
I think 2 more years, but I'm not sure. It could be only a year.
Okay. All right. Good. Appreciate that. Okay, the minutes from last month, we already noted the correction that Bakuwer was not 2 places at once. He was not there. So names being struck from the member present list.
Mr. Chair.
Any other?
Also,
comments?
Kevin Munson wasn't a member at the time. The terms for committee members
Okay.
starts in June. Grace you were at the meeting, yeah. So that just needs to be
Especially,
changed.
okay. Kevin should be moved to also present, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, Mr. Chair, as the
Either.
current custom is, you don't need to get a vote on the minutes.
I
You can just, yeah.
Thank you.
At the last meeting?
No, I
No.
wasn't.
Well, you weren't there.
No.
No, I wasn't. This is my first one, but the agenda package and the minutes and all that were from last month. Was sent to me. I couldn't find the ones, this one.
Oh,
Oh,
I'll show you where to find it.
Okay.
Okay, we need to make sure that gets resolved.
See, it's,
You went on this website to link out and they
Yep.
wouldn't let you link in there?
no, the link was to the old one. So just go to the committees or to the city's main website.
City.
Find them.
just go into the city and it should pop up. Okay.
And
Yeah.
you'll see over on
I'll
this
show
side,
you
it's like
afterwards.
agendas and minutes as well. There.
Do you have a background, Kevin? Or?
Yeah, let's go a little introduction.
So Kevin Munson, so I have undergraduate degrees in biology and chemistry and graduate degrees in aeronautics and business management. Ironically, my first job was in biotech at Genentech, a company out in South San Francisco, and I worked in QA/QC testing raw materials for our products, which also include water. So I had a lot of water training, systems training, both from the city water perspective through purified water systems, ultra pure water systems. And that's where I most of my background is. And systems like that, I also published a paper on using total organic carbon as a replacement for oxidizable substance test for the USP and all the water testing. So now that total organic carbon testing is now typically done online with conductivity. So it was some of the original work with this huge equipment that we had to do that. And I was working under a PhD scientist named Godfrey Crane, but I did all the testing. So we published that. So I had a lot of experience in water testing, both from the surface water, city water, groundwater testing, through the purified and ultra pure systems for both microbial and chemistry testing, including endotoxin. When you have injectables, what we call parenterals, they need to be free of pyrogens and endotoxin, those things that cause fever. So a lot of experience in that kind of testing. And so as far as designing stormwater systems, no, I don't have too much experience. I kind of know what they look like.
That's why I have people here to do that.
I've been out in the wild in our areas, our watersheds, and I've seen a lot of it. I don't quite know how it works.
You've been in Middleton since forever?
For about 20 years.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I live in Middleton Hills.
Yeah. Great.
Milton Hills is well represented.
I guess I want here. Let me for guidance here.
Did you declare the minutes accepted
I did.
with those modifications?
I
Okay.
did, as by consensus.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. We move on to the first agenda item. Or the fourth agenda item, sorry. The Valvoline 2209 Deming Way fee in lieu request. The information was all contained in the packet, but maybe you want to go ahead and give a summary?
Bruce Holler is here as the
Okay.
developer's engineer. You can.
Wow. I was like, right on.
He's here. Where'd he come from? Great. So what do you want to throw over to Bruce then? Or do you want-
Yeah, I guess what I would open up with is this. This site is asking for not meeting infiltration goals on the site. That is not out of the ordinary for the business park. I don't know if really any sites there have infiltrated due to soils. Confluence Pond is used as a rate control basin in the area. So they're meeting that, and then they're also meeting total suspended solids.
That's nice.
So staff recommends the fee in lieu request of $1,470.
Based on our current
Based on the current rates.
rates that we set up.
Yep.
That's for recharge, not infiltration. Or vice versa.
Yes. It is infiltration and recharge. They were the same. It's whatever the higher one was. I didn't write it
You
down.
can't do both. You only do-
Yeah, it's one or the other. I
I
believe
believe it was the recharge.
recharge. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get to Bruce, if you want to describe anything, do we have an actual boundary of area that is excused from the peak flow control because of confluence pond control? Is there actually a line somewhere on the map that says what parcels are and are not?
And not that I have been able to find.
I wondered that when I saw this.
I looked at properties that were right adjacent. to
Yeah,
This, the old stormwater management.
Sure.
Those properties.
Sure.
and They use the same approach.
well, yeah, I realized, I'm trying to figure out, this property is also Highway 14. I don't know how far out that line goes, if there is a line.
Sometimes people in the green or properties in the Greenway Center area also seem to indicate that they're included.
Yeah, I know, we've had
They didn't think they were, but
Well, I think when Steve Grant did the analysis for the north and the south fork.
Yeah,
The confluence pond, I thought it extended south 14 or, south the watershed anyway.
Well, the watershed certainly does.
Yeah,
I understand that. I don't know.
yeah.
And that's maybe a topic we need to,
Yeah.
what properties
Yeah.
actually qualify for the
I,
peak flow?
anything since I was on council.
And it's never been an issue because it's been the properties right around the pond, pretty much, a little bit north of the pond, and that, okay, we get it. This one has to go through storm sewer for quite a ways, right, to get to the,
So Pheasant Branch is right here.
yeah, the channel.
Luke, can we enlarge the image, please? Thank you.
We're right on, just off of Highway 14, right? You actually, that's,
Yeah, the bottom of the page, basically.
yeah. Okay, I'm not proposing to changing that policy tonight, so I just asked the question.
That is something I can look into, see if we have any
Yeah.
maps or
Yeah,
delineations.
it's in your record. You've done, I know the stormwater calculations are all in the report. Has it gone to the county yet or not?
Yes, it's gone to the county and it's gone to MSA, does our reviews now.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And they both reported back?
Yep.
Okay, so they verified the number, the calculations are all okay,
Yes, yeah, MSA is all on board with their report.
did they write you a little memo to that or email at least? Or
I get an email from MSA.
keep that on the record.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think remembering back, Jim, that apartment buildings being built currently on the corner of Deming and Greenway Boulevard. They use the confluence bond that be.
well, I think they actually used the Esser pond. They actually got credit because of Esser pond,
Yeah,
which is not the confluence pond. That was an Eric thing and that's what happened. That's my memory.
Yeah.
We can look at the minutes, but yeah, that's what you're thinking, Dave?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask a slightly unrelated question?
Well,
The consultant. How is, explain in a little more detail how waste oil is being dealt with so that it doesn't run off into anything?
Yeah, so this particular building has a basement. So
Okay,
the cars drive in and they're driving in on grates and all the work's being done on below the ground.
okay,
And since our plan commission meeting, because it came up during that meeting, we got some information from Valvoline that has all of their, and I believe that all the oil is below grade. If not, some of it's above grade. But in either case, the waste oil and the new oil are contained and within these sealed containers that are then, well, they're completely sealed, plus they're bolted down and fastened to the structure.
okay.
So there's no likelihood of, them floating away and
In
getting,
case of a flood like,
right, exactly.
that's the
Yep.
concern, not that's gonna spill, but the flooding is.
yeah, right.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay. Well,
That's
that's,
considered the best available technology for that.
Yeah, and it meets all EPA standards and, in the industry, so.
we don't really need to worry about oil contamination.
I just saw that it was the pit and flashbacks of 2018.
Right.
And that's why I asked the question to the plan commission, because big concern there,
Yeah,
have all this petroleum product there and,
Yeah,
you've looked at it and do you feel comfortable with this?
Yeah, MSA did not have any issues with it either.
Okay.
We both.
But tell me if I'm right or wrong, in 2018, that was inundated.
Oh, God.
oh, yes.
It would
yeah,
have probably been up to the finished floor,
and just for perspective, the
not higher.
FEMA map for the high water elevation and the greenway elevation is 918.7. And the first floor elevation here, we have 920.9.
Say 9 what?
920.9. So we're 2.2 feet higher than the
Current,
current mapping.
that's the 100-year, right?
Yeah.
100-year.
That's the current FEMA map, not the new one that we're working on.
Right, the 2009.
Yeah. Which had a much lower 100-year flood than we are
Yeah.
using for our current mapping.
But we haven't changed any of the numbers today, so
No, we haven't.
that's what we live with.
But they should be aware that 100.
It'd be nice.
Be higher.
Are you, yeah, at least, again, just from a full disclosure, aware of the elevations that the city is looking at, contemplating for the new flood elevation maps.
I haven't seen that, no.
And I don't, so what's our legal issue here? Can we at least make that known so that the engineers know what the numbers are? I'm looking at Lisa here because council member. How do you feel about that?
I guess it could be included as a contingency, to be.
It's just informational.
Just information.
Yeah,
The documents from Arrow are available on
It's
they made a presentation here,
Yeah,
so
true.
they can look and see what the 100-year elevation is at your site.
Yarrow,
Well, it's in, should be in the agenda packets.
Well,
Back to we go. I think that's.
Well, let's make it easy on them. Luke, you could just send,
Yeah,
based on this study, this is the current information we have on something.
make them
Yeah.
also aware where
Yeah,
we
And maybe-
anticipate the flood elevations. will be.
Yeah.
Make it aware for everybody that's coming forward.
yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
Proactive.
there's this site and one other site next to the Costco gas station. Those are the only two lots available in Discovery Springs. They're the last two.
That are undeveloped.
Yeah, they're undeveloped, so.
Okay. So I would like to, well, we don't approve this anyway.
we recommend that council.
Yeah, right.
I had a question about the calculation. So on page 6, it says that what's going to be done will result in the cumulative addition of 20,000 square feet of impervious surface to the site. That the fee calculation is only on 7,262 square.
That was an error. That it should be less than 20,000. I should have. Is that in the
I saw it on page 6 of the packet,
The
So-
PDF page number or the,
the PDF page number.
Okay.
oh,
So I think it might be in the previous, if you're looking just at the request, it's on that page.
Is that,
Nope.
is that additional impervious or?
Back up and zoom in. It's way at the top. Might be right there.
introduction?
yeah, it's probably in 4,000. Oh, wait, there it is in the last
Last
paragraph.
paragraph.
1,000 square feet.
The cumulative addition.
So that is the stormwater requirement. So since 2001, August 2001, if you add 20,000 square feet of impervious to a site, that triggers new development.
To the existing developed site.
Yeah, it triggers a new development standard.
Okay,
So-
so it's phrased incorrectly because what it's, the reference to the 20,000 cumulative addition of 20,000 square feet is just to establish that this
Meets that criteria.
meets that criteria. It's not actually a factual statement about how much is being added.
Yeah, so I guess it could be rephrased to be a little clearer. It could say cumulative addition of 20,000 square feet since August 22nd, 2001, whatever.
Yeah. No, I mean, to me, if it says it's going to add 20,000 square feet, and then later I see a calculation that says 7,362, I'm
Yeah.
wondering, where's the rest? Yeah, so that's all, but I get the explanation.
Any other questions on this topic?
I just wonder if there's any way to plant native plants and grasses instead of the DOT 40 seed mix.
The biobeds will have the native plants.
Right.
I think the lawn areas.
Turf grass. It says it's the DOT.
Yeah, I think Is this plan set have the landscape plan on it? In it? Or is it just?
Yeah.
No, it's just the.
It just referenced what it would be.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking anything to enhance evapotranspiration and provide habitat would be greatly appreciated. And not to steal any of Grace's thunder, but I believe she has a slide that has this statement: mowed lawn has a negative effect on biodiversity.
We can't use.
So recognizing
Uh-huh.
Middleton's interest in preserving biodiversity and this being so close to surface waters, it just seems like it might be a good opportunity to not have regular mowed lawn.
Minimize it.
No, we.
Yeah.
What I could. What I could maybe suggest is we. So along the greenway, there's a 12.5 foot wide environmental corridor.
Mhm.
I could offer to, have them.
Continue that vegetation.
Yeah, because that would be more of a continuation of the greenway up into that
Yeah,
portion of the site.
that would be great.
Okay,
That would be
yeah,
wonderful.
that's easy enough to update on the plan.
Any other questions? Bruce?
Yeah, I'm curious about how the structure is gonna look. It's gonna be a basement underneath where the cars are gonna get a change.
So you drive in on the first floor at grade, and then there are grates underneath, and the workers are down below working on the
Yeah.
on the way.
You're a visitor of Halloween? I have.
So there will be a basement.
Yeah.
And you have to have some pumps in you.
Yeah.
Like,
Water
yeah.
situation.
Yeah, they're gonna have to have a very robust waterproofing system around the foundation, and this has also been surcharged over a number of years, so to prevent this, because the soils are not the best out there, toothpaste consistency, so they've got it all kind of set up for the surcharging. You got everything all firmed up enough. But they're also reinforcing the slab of the building as well. So between the reinforcement and then the waterproofing on the outside, and I'm sure they'll have a sump inside, just because it's a basement.
What's the depth of the water table at that point?
I don't think there's a soil boring on there. I think there's a test pit in there somewhere. I don't know that we ran into any groundwater.
So the basement doesn't intersect with the groundwater table.
I don't think so.
Yeah, soil boring's down 6 feet.
So I think the borings go a little bit deeper here.
Oh, we don't discover any things.
Oh, wait a minute, I get the wrong numbers. Yeah, I know, you're right.
They won't there.
Or
Just the
There is
outlook.
no base flow in the stream at that point.
We're down
So
20
the stream
feet.
doesn't intersect with the groundwater table. And you're above the stream elevation a little bit.
Yeah.
About 12, 16 feet.
Yeah,
About 15 feet, yeah.
and
I don't have a elevation of the building.
It's gonna look sort of like a car wash
down there.
that you drive through.
Similar, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's got like 3 bays, and you go to the plan commission, there's some
Picture
elevations.
of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I just have one on page, again, 40 of the PDF. It's in the maintenance agreement. It says that mowing is required during the first 2 years and may be performed once per year after that. And I'm wondering, do we require that the cuttings be removed after mowing? I know this is a big issue that comes up in Misty Valley and other places where the mowing is done and then
Just left.
it's just left behind and clogs up the drains.
Yeah, typically I don't think we have. Typically you can leave it in place. Or you can remove it if it's gonna cause issues with an outlet structure or something. Yeah. But typically, I don't think I have seen us put any stipulations.
I
in our
don't think,
maintenance
you know,
agreements.
Costco, I think they just leave it.
Yeah,
And this would be equivalent to that.
Is that the most effective way to preserve the stormwater function?
yeah, I guess in a way, you're keeping the nutrients on
Mhm.
site. That's the way I would look at it. It's like a natural mulch.
You're more concerned with the block
Yeah.
debris blocking
Mhm.
downstream culverts and whatnot.
Right.
But the grass would be below the overflow outlet. So unless,
I'm thinking of mowing on the greenway itself.
Or any mowing, because if you go to Misty Valley after it's been mowed and then there's a big rain event. And even in Pheasant Branch Ridge, this happens where the water gets high enough that it leaves the debris sitting on top of the outflow. I'm sure.
Um,
Well, the fortunate thing about the three basins, biobeds we have here, we're using it's just a little depression in the berm for the overflow, for there's really no pipe or
There's not a standpipe
structure
there?
to get clogged.
Okay, that's.
So that
that's
if
good.
it does float, it should just
It'll-
carry over.
And also note that these will have plant plugs rather than just, turf grass or something like that. So like out at Misty Valley, it's just grass and there's no infiltration occurring.
Anything else? Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, just so that we have to go to council with the stormwater maintenance agreement. So I just want to make sure that if that's included as part of this recommendation. Or
It is
not,
part of
I
the
don't know if
packet.
It's
Yeah.
part of the packet.
Yeah.
What's the recommended motion?
Recommend to send the stormwater maintenance agreement to council for approval.
What about the fees and lieu request?
And for
Isn't it pending approval of the stormwater management plan?
Well, that's what
Okay,
that's why I asked about MSA's review and the county review have both been completed. Is that right? So they,
the pending of approval is the recording of the maintenance agreement and payment fees.
so the approval of the stormwater maintenance or management plan is contingent upon the action we're being asked to take tonight. Is that what you just said?
I don't think we need approval of the stormwater management plan.
we don't,
Okay.
we don't approve the plan. Us, this
Right.
commission.
A pending staff approval.
Mhm. So it'd be approval of the fees in lieu and approval of, or recommending approval, the maintenance agreement for approval at council.
Okay, so we need two motions. Okay, so I'll move to approve the fees and lieu request in the amount of $1,472.40. Pending staff approval of the site stormwater management plan.
I'll second it.
Wait for Richard to get there.
I think at some point we need to round these numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Up to the nearest dollar.
Yeah.
That could be part of the discussion agenda item.
Okay, you got the motion? We got a second from Warren?
I believe so.
You
It's
good?
recorded. Yeah.
Okay. All in favor of that motion, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And now the maintenance plan?
I'll make another motion to refer the stormwater management maintenance agreement for the 2209 Deming Way site to common council for approval.
I'll second that.
And I would, I don't know if you can add this, if there needs to be a motion or not, add, and it's just a request, that city staff will provide the current flood elevations as calculated by EOR for informational purposes. Is that language we add to the motion, or just happens because we asked you to?
Yeah. I don't think we need a motion.
You okay with that? We just asked Luke to do that, so.
Okay.
Okay. And again, we want you to know and your client to know that this is how the water was, or, you know, has been, and this doesn't, I don't think, solve any environmental impact that, you know, could be demonstrated from that site. Okay, did we vote on the second motion?
No, you have not.
So on the maintenance agreement, all's as proposed, all's in favor, say aye. Opposed? Okay. Next.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Yep.
So, yeah, so one of my notes for the future agenda topic would be to discuss the maintenance agreement language.
And also blood maps.
And the flood map and the calculation of the fee and lieu. We got all those things covered. Okay, we are on to Grace presentation.
Is that all right if I stand at the front? Because I'm
Yeah.
thanks all the art folks.
Like a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to go into teaching.
First of all, thank you for serving on this commission for
Yes.
all your time. And I know that you've got a lot of things going on. And if you ever decide you want to re-up,
Thank you. Yes.
that might
Would you
happen.
like the mouse to scroll?
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it has been such a pleasure to have served on this commission. I'm excited to talk to you all now in a different capacity and share some of the work that we have been doing over the past 3 years on urban pond water quality. This is work that has been funded by the National Science Foundation and is a part of our long-term ecological research program, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. My goal today is to update you all a bit on where we are at as we are moving into sort of a new phase of our study, give you some of the highlights. I'm happy to take questions on this, so please feel free to interrupt. And my goal is to kind of keep it high level, but I'm always happy to get down into the weeds. I'm going to try to prevent that because
Is that macrophytes you mean, or do you mean?
let's talk microphones. Okay, we can start with a quick quiz. Which pond is this?
Oh, that's pump. Oh, sorry.
Yes. We see them as, shared, at least in ours. So a lot of what I have learned in being on this commission and the way that we think about stormwater ponds, whether they have been retrofitted or designed, we think a lot about, on this commission about things like the what purpose these stormwater ponds serve. They provide water storage, they can enhance infiltration, and in particular through the capture of sediments and nutrients, improve downstream water quality, right? So when we're thinking about these ponds, that's often the features that we think about. And these features can be very much part of the design and thinking about both water storage as well as pond design, where the weir is located, how much bounce or change in water level we see with that. And these are all gears that also drive what the water quality in those ponds, both in the ponds and downstream are. So that might be the lens through which you think about stormwater ponds. When I think about stormwater ponds, I also think about them as ecosystems. And they're fascinating ecosystems. So thinking about all the biological and chemical constituents and what's happening. We have hundreds, if not over 1,000 of these ponds across Dane County, many of them here in Madison and Middleton. We build new ones all the time. We talk about that on this commission, right? And these are ecosystems that are doing a lot of work and providing a lot of services beyond the ones that I just talked about. And that's part of what's been informing our research. I've been saying R and we broadly, and I mentioned that this is a part of our North Temperate Lakes long-term ecological research program. We've developed an urban aquatic observatory. You can see the many places that we're doing that research. All the circles are ponds in which we've been doing research. We being a large group of investigators at the university, and myself, and the triangles being where we have urban heat island monitoring that's been occurring.
Does this involve more than UW affiliated scientists and staff?
It's just us.
Just UW.
Yeah, and our perhaps the way that most people know us at the North Temperate Lakes Ecological Research Program is we are the ones that are doing all the long-term monitoring on Mendota, Monona, Wingra, Yarra Chain of Lakes, and Fish Lake, and providing the only source of long-term, consistent, and robust data on these things. we're also a program that is very much threatened, and we have every reason to believe that this will probably be our last summer of data collection unless we can find other ways. The National Science Foundation has funded us for over the past 47 years. We've been providing both these data as well as trying to also bring our scientific expertise. We love our lakes as much as everyone else. So if you also happen to know or have any ideas, I'm all ears as I've recently taken over this program that feels like a sinking ship. But no matter what, we're still excited to continue contributing to the science. And so you can see some of the things that we are doing across these ponds. I want to give a couple of highlights and then I'll drill down into what we're doing and our research. So for example, through this work, students like Daniel Trevelyan have measured over 100 ponds across Madison, trying to understand how different factors, both pond design, where ponds are located, and different features influence things like biodiversity. Why do we care about biodiversity? Biodiversity, those organisms, the plants, the animals are doing all the work to deliver those ecosystem services in these ponds. As you can see, our ponds in the urban environments have a less biodiversity compared to those out in more rural Dane County. But trying to explain all that variation, as was referenced, thank you, Lisa, that Daniel found things that like mowed lawn around ponds has a negative effect on biodiversity, looking across ponds in Dane County. We also see invasive species. So we have both carp and goldfish in a lot of our ponds. Tiedemann's, right, sometimes just looks like it's swimming with them, and how complex that habitat is. So those macrophytes or aquatic plants can be really important for sustaining biodiversity. We also have researchers, Jess Hua and her group, who you see pictured here. They focus on amphibians and try to understand, for example, how that biodiversity has been changing. You can see in 2023, you might remember we had that major drought throughout the summer, which had a large effect on amphibian species, but a little bit different of an effect, or how severe that effect was based upon whether rural or urban. And Jess's group is also really interested in understanding how we have epidemics of viruses that, just like we have viruses as humans, that move through in our amphibian population. So things like frog virus 3, and her group, mine, Hillary Dugan, we're also trying to understand that in terms of how road salt as a stressor is influencing this biodiversity.
I got to ask, you're aware of the city of Madison's amphibian relocation program they do when they're dredging the ponds?
Yes, yes.
They just started that up a year or two ago, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of opportunities for us there too to talk a bit about our volunteer water monitoring group. Jess runs an amphibian volunteer monitoring group throughout Madison, has a lot of sites in Middleton. If you're ever interested in learning more about that, she gives a very enthusiastic presentation for the course of the meeting. So I'd encourage you to invite her. But yeah, thank you for that reminder. We also know that these ponds are very good. We sometimes want them to be designed to store sediments and contaminants, for example, things like chloride, but then they can get flushed downstream and affect that downstream water quality. And so work by Hannah Curtis, being in combination with Steve Lohide, who you might be familiar with at the university, urban hydrologist, have been trying to understand how ponds that are designed, how they're engineered, that engineering design influences what happens, for example, to how much chloride is stored versus flushed further downstream. And this data set, I know the commission has been very interested in chloride and chloride contamination. This was from that 2023 drought, excuse me. You can see some of the ponds in this data set were up, one was up to 1,000 milligrams per liter. That is extremely salty. I've put what the EPA criteria for supporting aquatic life is on there, 230. Lots of concentration that was during the drought. That first big rain post-drought, you can see how much in those light blue bars chloride was decreased. So these ponds, they are definitely below that threshold, and I have some data later that I will show. Yeah, absolutely. There's still definitely chloride. One other thing that these ponds are doing is actually producing a lot of greenhouse gases, potent greenhouse gases like methane, which are 85 times more potent than, say, carbon dioxide. Our concentration in the atmosphere is about here. You can see how many of these ponds, this is some data from Adriana Gorski, showing how just essentially these ponds are hotspots of greenhouse gas contributing to that climate forcing and climate warming.
And-
And we just keep building more of them.
This is more so than natural lakes on a per unit basis of absorb?
Yeah, we actually, the smaller, essentially the water, but surface water body, the greater the greenhouse gas production and emissions per square meter. A lot of that has to do with just how much
The
of the,
organic productivity.
yeah, so that's sort of that perimeter to
Yeah.
volume ratio.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, a lot of this started its life as plant material on land before it decomposed into this methane by microbes. All right, so all of this work that I just highlighted is been work that these students have done that has really been going out and taking a snapshot. We have, like I said, thousands of these ponds across Dean County, going out, taking measurements once, maybe twice, to try to understand what that variability looks like. In my group, and what the work we've been doing in Middleton is a recognition of the fact that these urban ponds are extremely dynamic. And when we go out and take snapshots, we're getting some good information, but we're really not getting the full picture. And so we've been investing in longer term and more consistent monitoring in a set of ponds, mainly based here in Middleton, in order to better understand how their ecosystem functions. These things I've been talking about are changing over time, especially if we want to make recommendations or how we might better manage these ponds or design them in order to enhance the benefits and decrease the harms. So that's been sort of the foundation of the basis of our work. We've been asking a set of research questions. How do ponds receive, process, and store nutrients and pollutants? What role does climate change play in that? Particularly, we'll talk about algal blooms. And then finally, how are ponds hotspots of these greenhouse gas emissions? And I just want to briefly touch on some of this as we go up. Do this work, we established what we call the Community Water Monitoring Network. This is our community volunteer water monitoring program. I have to say the citizens of Middleton have been enthusiastic volunteers in contributing to this. We're extremely grateful. Currently, our program has 28 volunteers. We only keep adding. We've not lost one yet. I'm very proud of that, over 3 years. They sample 10 pond sites that you see listed on this map, collecting over 270 samples in the past 2.5 years, over 700 water samples, and greater than 2,000 observations. This has been really powerful in us understanding the dynamics of these ecosystems and how they're changing. These folks are fantastic limnologists out there making observations and have kept us on our toes in understanding what's going on in these ponds. And you can see just some examples of photos of our fantastic monitoring group. We do not allow minors in our program. However, they can accompany adults out on their sampling. And so it's been a really great opportunity for families to pursue sort of scientific investigation together. And my in-laws are right there, so even families. They're my ringers from the start. All right, so I want to briefly go over some of the things that we've learned. When I show these bar graphs, I have the different ponds that we sample as a part of our program here along the horizontal axis. The ones that are colored are ponds that are in Middleton, just to sort of orient you. I include the others outside of Middleton that are in Madison or Fitchburg, just as reference. I'm showing you the average from every sample that we have from that pond that our volunteers have collected. The sort of measure of variance, so the standard deviation is shown at that bar there, and the number above is the number of samples that's going into that average, just so you're aware. And the reason we wanted to do that is, for example, you'll notice on Graber Pond and Orchid South, which were recently added to our program because volunteers were interested, we only have 6 samples collected versus Stricker's 163. We know a lot about Strickers. So some main takeaways from this. What I'm showing you here is total phosphorus concentrations. We talk a lot about total phosphorus on this commission. And the key takeaway here looking at these concentrations is they are, most of the ponds are excessively enriched with nutrients. Some of that's by design, right? We design these ponds to trap sediment and keep those nutrients in the pond. These are really high. For reference, this dash line is about where Lake Mendota sits. So most of the ponds are higher than that. Everything except for the pond in Lakeview, that's like the next one featured in the park with the gazebo, not the one shoved in the back that receives the water from humans. That one has pretty good water quality. So quite high, as you can tell here. And a classification tool we use in limnology based on things like the total phosphorus concentration is what we call the trophic state index, or how we would classify that water body based on how nutrient enriched it is. And we do that because it helps us make predictions about things, about how we might expect that ecosystem to be functioning. And so every water body, every pond in Middleton that we sample, except for that Lakeview pond, is considered hypereutrophic. That means high concentration of nutrients, which support a lot of algal growth. This is the inflow from the forebay into Stricker's Pond. You can see all that algae there. You've probably seen it yourself. So very poor water clarity. The likelihood of toxin producing blooms can be quite high. This is almost entirely cyanobacteria that have the potential to produce those toxins. Hypoxic, so low oxygen conditions, that's very stressful and possibly even lethal to some of the animals there, and very poor fish and wildlife habitat.
Have you looked at sources of phosphorus on the pond?
Yes, we've done some what we call storm rodeo sampling and trying to understand essentially from which inputs we're getting a lot of the phosphorus coming off. It hasn't been particularly helpful. We've done some internal loading studies on strickers, and shockingly, so that's release of phosphorus from the sediment up into the water where algae and whatnot can take it up. Surprisingly, strickers is pretty well balanced, and there's very little internal loading from those sediments that we can measure. The forebay is a completely different story, and I will get to that in a second, but it is just belching phosphorus downstream.
At one time, I think you mentioned were collecting atmospheric samples for phosphorus.
Not for phosphorus. Yeah, but there are atmospheric monitoring sites around the city, so that would be a great. I know when I worked in Iowa in particular, in the spring, some atmospheric phosphorus deposition accounted for about 10% of inputs at that time of year, so I know it can be pretty substantial.
Grace, are you looking at any of the bacteria that might be present in the water or the soils?
So we do. I put under the scope to understand what cyanobacteria are there at particular times. I'm very interested in understanding if there might be toxin producers. Beyond that, we have some collaborations with Trina McMahon at the university, and her group has been doing some samples, and we'll do them for genetic testing, so we'll have a better sense.
What's she looking at?
She'll be looking at both the autotrophic, so the cyanobacteria, that's going to be one of the assays, and then really interested in the heterotrophic bacteria that are there, especially since we've always
pathogen.
Yeah, we don't do a lot in terms of pathogens, but more of a focus is thinking about it would.
Where it's coming from.
Yes. Yeah. To date, our focus has mainly been on trying to understand what microbes are there that are doing things like denitrification, which gets rid of nitrogen from the system, and the ones that produce the methane, and trying to understand there.
So the phosphorus, I was thinking it was function of the runoff from fertilizer, or we would, see nitrates and potassium, but it's really more of a function of bacterial respiration then, you were saying?
Yeah, it's sort of a complex soup. So absolutely, there's a lot coming in from the watershed of these ponds. Like you said, part of that is fertilizer inputs that might be happening on ponds and other things in the watershed. Part of it is atmospheric deposition that Warren mentioned. Leaves, for example, in the fall, we just create, especially those silver maples, right? Oh my gosh. Just massive amounts of phosphorus. There's been some great work actually coming out of the Twin Cities that with each summer rainstorm, just that atmospheric deposition of nutrients onto leaves. And you get that rain, and if that canopy overhang, it's going right, or the street, it's going right into the storm drain.
You're aware of that. I mean, there was extensive USGS studies in the street.
Yes.
Seasonal phosphorus runoff from leaves in the streets. It's a tea that gets formed, and it's very evident that in the fall, 60% of our phosphorus load happens in about 4 to 6 weeks, in a residential area with tree canopy over the street.
Yes, and we really see that reflected in our ponds as well, since we're out there sampling regularly. We'll have, like dissolved organic carbon, you mentioned TOC, we'll have concentrations that go upwards of probably 100 to 160 milligrams per liter. And a couple weeks later, once that has moved through, we'll be back down.
So
it's just
So the conclusion is remove all street trees, along the streets would help a lot for our water.
It's a silver maybe.
So Minneapolis has been exploring and has done a really cool job with this. They've actually incentivized increased the more times the city goes through and does street sweeping of leaves and removes that, then they're getting phosphorus credit as a part of their.
And that's happening here too. Wisconsin still does that.
Yeah,
I think we started
of course we.
it. But take credit, give Roger Bannerman credit where credit's due. He's the guy that gets all the credits. Anyway,
Yeah, so, but we also, so that phosphorus, once it comes into the system, can also get stored a lot in the sediments and then be re-released. And so that internal loading process can also, at times when you're not having that external loading, be a source of phosphorus too. That.
Yeah,
get to your question.
definitely, yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Probably.
Thank you.
I
No, that's very
I
clear.
love talking about phosphorus. So speaking of that, one of the things we've been really curious about in trying to understand internal phosphorus loading studies can be really time intensive. And they give us a nice snapshot of a core of sediment we can take back to the lab and measure the rate. It's kind of artificial, but it gives us an idea. So another metric that I've used a lot in very nutrient rich agricultural areas is looking at, so that total phosphorus that I showed before, that's every form of possible phosphorus that could be in the water, whether it's in algal cell, it's adhered to a sediment particle, or it's free floating, like dissolved in the water. If we look at the percentage of the total phosphorus that's coming from the soluble reactive phosphorus, or essentially the phosphate component. For example, if we did that in Mendota, there is nothing more scarce than a phosphate molecule in Mendota in the middle of the summer, because if it is available, an algae is going to take that up and produce more algae. That's why we get those excellent blooms, right? Just pea soup green. And so in some of these more nutrient rich ponds though, we're seeing some interesting patterns. For example, in Forebay on average, about 20% of the phosphorus that we measure is just in that phosphate form. So in other words, there's a lot of phosphate that's there that's available for organisms to take it up and do stuff there. We also see that, for example, in ponds like Alver, some of the deeper ponds, Orchid North, Forebay, when it can get deep, Elver, and this could possibly be because that internal loading I'll talk about in a second. One thing to keep in mind, you see Lakeview is coming up, it was really high here too in terms of that percentage. The total amount of total phosphorus and SRP in that pond is quite low to begin with, so this percentage seems like it's inflating. Mm-hmm. That being said, there seems to be a pretty common pattern that when we have conditions like Lakeview, you see all of this submerged vegetation. That can lead to these higher phosphate concentrations. And that submerged vegetation is essentially competing with the algae for light and other resources. And so it's helping maintain that more what we call clear water vegetated state. So not as surprising to me, Wingra does this all the time too. And it's just chock full of that submerged vegetation. So it's actually something with our volunteers that we're digging into more this summer to try to understand why these conditions in Lakeview and in the Forebay, for example, seem so similar and what might cause the switch between. Questions as we move on. So I mentioned in terms of that internal loading or that release of phosphorus. And so just if you're not familiar, most of the phosphorus or phosphate in the sediments that could be released is bound to things like iron. And so the way that I always teach it in my class is if oxygen's around, phosphorus is bound. When there's not oxygen, which happens very often in the bottom waters of these ponds, that's when we can get the unbinding of that phosphate from the iron release up into the water. That internal loading process occurs. And again, having that depth really helps that those oxygen conditions go to zero. Although every time in many of the ponds, because we have these sensors, every time it rains, it reoxygenates and we start that process over again. But one of the things that we are seeing in our data set and has been found in many other areas as well, is that when you have these deeper stormwater ponds that go anoxic, they might even stratify. So in other words, there's a change in the density of temperature in the water column. That's a great way to get this internal loading happening. And then big storm comes through, pushes all that water. And then these ponds become, where they're supposed to be sinks of phosphorus and storing that in the sediments, they're now sources of the more bioavailable or delicious phosphorus for algae to grow downstream. And so this really speaks to thinking about pond design. I know oftentimes we want to have sort of the smallest footprint where possible if we can make it deep. because that can maximize other land uses for why that pond is being built. But that can have some unintentional negative consequences. All right, the other possibility, and that has been raised, we've been looking at, is that, well, what about chloride? Right? We know that these ponds have a lot of chloride. So I said I would get to the chloride concentrations. I've split it up looking at what chloride concentrations are when the ponds aren't ice covered, it's not winter, versus what we're seeing in winter. Just so that you're getting a little bit of the story. Not surprisingly, in almost every pond that we look at in the winter, we have higher chloride concentrations. Part of that is ice like ion rejection. Part of that is also just the amount that we're putting on the roads, a little bit lower. And you can see in terms of those criteria, the state of Wisconsin is technically higher at 395. I always go towards the EPA's 230. Our ponds are sitting below that with times, for example, that the forebay and that pond in Lakeview Park that's hidden back, right, receiving Tiedemann's, is getting some higher concentrations that are exceeding that temporarily.
So where does the chloride go during the, I mean, there's no drainage from, so does the chloride just go to the soil?
You're talking about the Lakeview Pond, that
Yeah,
is.
well, Tiedemann's or Strickers, there's no drainage out of them, so the chloride gotta stay there.
Well, Strickers does drain into Tiedemann's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we see that if we look at the time series, that it will cascade down over time.
So it's just accumulating over time.
Yes, and then eventually ending up at its final downstream home.
There's no Tiedemann's, a little bit maybe.
Well, there's the pumping
Yeah, it's
station.
There's no, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
years like 2024, I think we had a fair number of pumping events out of Tiedemann's. You maybe just,
I've pumped a bit, but maybe 10 times.
it's in our water level data. We can see it. It didn't, what's happening? There it goes. It's good to know that that's about what we estimated as well. Anyways, the other idea that's been put out there that's kind of hot in the scientific literature right now is, well, chloride has the ability to essentially, phosphate is always trying to be in equilibrium concentrations between the sediment and the water that it's over. Chloride can come in and essentially kick that phosphate out and potentially increase the concentration in the water. It's called nonspecific anion exchange. We actually took sediments from mostly Middleton ponds and did a set of assays in order to understand if what we're seeing, if the chloride that's coming in with road salts and through the groundwater is potentially contributing to more phosphorus being in the water, right? What might be happening there? And while we did see that the more chloride you add to these sediments, it does enhance the phosphate that's coming off. Because we have this monitoring in the ponds that our volunteers are providing, we can put it in the context of what we measure in the ecosystems. And so if you do the budget, it's contributing some, but it's really not making a difference. That's not probably a mechanism to go after to try to reduce phosphorus in these ponds. It's part of the noise. And again, if we were just having our lab data, we might come to a different conclusion. That's why it's so critical to have the context of the ecosystems you're studying in those measurements. Okay, keeping going. So we're also curious about what happens in terms of when there's rain, like today, what that means and how that changes both the nutrient cycling and the effects like the algal blooms that might be happening. I think if we've all visited Strickers, Tiedemann's, very familiar with the like pea soup green water that can appear there, right? So in Strickers and Tiedemann's for the past 3 years, we've actually had a suite of sensors that's measuring both changes in water level every 15 minutes, as well as measuring how much algae is in the water by measuring the pigment chlorophyll. So not surprisingly, this is just one example of our water level data from Strickers this past year in the open water season. The blue shows water level. The black bars coming down from below is precipitation, so when there was a rain event. And through a statistical analysis, the red lines connecting them are saying this is a rain event where we saw a substantial change in water level that we can attribute to that precipitation. We actually see our ponds breathing in terms of water level every day as evapotranspiration changes. And so we need to be big. So you can see in Strickers, if we get some big rainstorms, we can see up to a ½ meter change in water level that's occurring. But it's designed to do that, right? So what happens to the algae? Not surprising, really groundbreaking. It rains, we get an increase in water level. You know, you all are shocked.
We better get an increase. If it doesn't, then I'm on. I guess
That's where I get my first science or nature paper, right? So to make a very like multi-year complicated and intricate analysis cut short, what we see in these ponds when we have that increase in water level is we have a very substantial increase in algal biomass about 8 to 10 days later. And so these storms very much are driving the changes or the fluctuation in how much algae is there. And it's not just because it's flushing it further downstream. Part of it might be because of those nutrients that are coming in with the stormwaters from the watershed. But we also think a part of this has to do with how it's changing the amount of light. So first we see a dilution, which is great because mostly these algae are limited by not being able to see the sun because of how thick the algae is. There's a dilution, they can do that, they grow, but they grow past the concentrations where they were before. So it's not just rebounding to where the pond was before, but essentially worsening that algal bloom.
And that's you're measuring chlorophyll A on that for an indicator. Okay.
Yeah, and again, for reference, in Mendota, we maybe get up to 100, and we're seeing concentrations. Strickers always goes for the gold. One time we saw up to 400 micrograms per liter. You probably could have chewed the water. Sorry, it makes it sound like we love these ponds. They're amazing. And the amount of opportunities we have to learn from the folks of Middleton that are there recreating and enjoying the ponds about the history of them and what they observe has been invaluable in our understanding.
Does algae strip the phosphorus out of the water column?
It'll take it up, but they tend to have a pretty short life cycle and die and then decompose. And so that decomposition will release it again, unless that algae is moved further downstream. Some of that algae will escape decomposition and essentially end up in the sediments. And that's part of why our sediments build up over time, in addition to what's being trapped from the storms, but not all.
Did you see Todd Stubbick's presentation last month?
I did.
The confluence pond, he showed that the dissolved phosphorus will be removed by the confluence pond. The only thing I could think of is algae was stripping off. I should have asked him how that's happening. I can't believe that confluence pond is removing dissolved phosphorus.
Yeah, I was curious about that as well. And I imagine part of it must be that biological uptake. And then I'm curious in terms of the confluence, how much export downstream occurs.
He has that.
It's all going. You weren't there, Jim.
I wasn't there, but he has those. He would know that answer. How much export comes?
Well, we measure downstream.
Yeah.
We measure dissolved and,
Sure.
and total.
Yeah.
So particulate.
Yeah.
I should have asked in more detail about that, because our assumption always was the confluence pond just removed the phosphorus attached to the sediment.
Against.
Yeah.
And his was quite substantial.
I know, I saw that too. I was really intrigued. That's actually what led me to pull that together for our percentages. Yeah. So one of the other things we also had was dissolved oxygen sensors. Dissolved oxygen sensors you can buy them more independently and cheaper. So we had the opportunity to put them in many more ponds. The sensors that we had in Strickers and Tiedemann's that the city really helped facilitate us having there, which was fantastic, you can only get 2 of those per grant. But as you can see, so what I'm showing you here is dissolved oxygen concentrations, the average by the day, in 6 of the different ponds here in Middleton where we had those sensors in for 2023 and 2020.
These are daily averages, just low and high divided by 2.
Yeah, they're measuring every 15 minutes, so it's taking that full day's worth of data.
Kind of so it is a weighted average, kind of over time.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the surface, we're seeing, for example, in the 4-bay, many days when we only had it in 2024, granted, where dissolved oxygen concentrations were near 0. That's going to really encourage a lot of that internal loading and then export into Strickers when there's that connection. And certainly in 2024, those 2 water bodies are connected. Strickers, we only see that a little bit. We had that drought in 2023 at the beginning, much lower water levels, not a lot of connection. So not surprising. We had a few days of that lower dissolved oxygen in Strickers and Tiedemann's. Lakeview West did okay, Orchid North Again, Lakeview, our submerged aquatic vegetation, just doing its job photosynthesizing, sending that oxygen out there. So we didn't see any days in our record on average in which Lakeview West got below that critical criteria supporting aquatic life that the state has. So that's also something to keep an eye on. And we know that there have been some sort of very public fish and turtle kills that have happened, for example, on Tiedemann's in 2023. This happened in the spring that have concerned the public. And so part of our understanding at that time, dissolved oxygen was quite high. So there's probably some other things at play there. I don't know if any of you remember that. It was right there. Lots of dead snappers. They probably died in the winter and they just finally floated into town. All right, last thing. And then I'll leave you be. We're also measuring those methane or greenhouse gas concentrations. Been doing this for 3 years, all sorts of data to dig into here. What the top level and what I want you to take away from this, I mentioned that really low dissolved oxygen in the forebay that we see repeatedly, that high potential internal loading, and we're also seeing methane concentrations in that water that are being released to the atmosphere that are staggeringly high. This is on a log scale. These are some of the highest I've ever measured in any inland water. Strickers and Tiedemann's and Lakeview West are doing a bit better in that regard, but they're all sources of methane in the atmosphere during the water season, so when it's not ice covered.
How do you measure that? I'm curious how you do that.
So you take water sample and essentially in a syringe, you add N2, so it should be inert, and equilibrate. So you're essentially trying to equilibrate based on temperature, the gas in the water with the gas that's now in the syringe. Then we sample that gas, run it on our gas chromatograph, and then back calculate how much was in the water.
Per unit volume, and then you extrapolate that to.
Yep, and then we can also use information about essentially how much wind, so how fast the pond water is exchanging with the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Actually calculate flux.
Right. You're agitating the sample in the lab, but that you're trying to represent air exchange.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to do that. We also have another instrument called an LGR where we can actually put a chamber on top of the water and it measures the rate of change of methane and CO2, nitrous oxide as well, but we don't talk about that.
It floats in the pond water.
Yep, and so gives us that estimate of flux, and they're pretty comparable methods.
Okay.
And so in terms of if you were to do that and back calculate what's in the water, it's the same, pretty similar to what you're getting out of that syringe method. Yeah, so, but if we were thinking what might be the error in relation to that, again, the atmosphere is sitting down here. So even if we're off by an order of magnitude, it's still a massive amount to the atmosphere.
And if you were to do the same test, in Lake Mendota or any other natural lake anywhere, you would not expect these levels.
No, in Mendota, we do see sometimes where it gets a bit above 100. So maybe a little bit more comparable to what we're seeing in these ponds. Forebay is its own, Forebay and 2 is really its own biogeochemical beast. And I know it's not alone in design in terms of ponds around the city. So what we've learned so far, again, quickly, our ponds are really rich in things like phosphorus and chloride. The lack of oxygen in bottom waters of some of these ponds is likely contributing to released phosphorus. Storms are helping drive more algal growth in the pond. Big swings in dissolved oxygen, really stressful, even if they were above that criteria threshold I forgot to mention. Just the huge amounts of during the day, high oxygen, at night from respiration really low. That's really stressful. If you are an organism that's requiring that, depending on that oxygen in the water, it's really stressful. And that low oxygen leading to those high greenhouse gases. And so as we move into the next phase of our work, we're working on synthesizing all of this, trying to use, what have we learned in these 10 ponds that we can sort of try to apply more broadly across Madison. We have some folks that are even working on carbon budgets in relation to this. But also trying to come up with some potentially actionable recommendations for what might be better ecological pond design and water level management to minimize these harms while maximizing.
Since our water resource management, one of our goals is to protect and enhance the water resources of Middleton, where do you see the ponds 15 years from now or 100 years from now?
That's a really great question. I think I'm going to give the caveat that I think the ponds are definitely one of the tools that we are using, have used, and probably will continue to, if not more so, use in our toolbox as our precipitation continues to change. And so ponds provide really vital services that we design them for in terms of this water storage, the humid infiltration, and nutrient management. But I would hope that in 50 years, we're in a place where we're doing some more thoughtful or ecologically driven pond design in order to minimize these harms. That's like a cop-out answer to your question, but
Well, you know,
that's what I'm thinking.
when our committee was formed
Yeah.
50 years ago, these were dry ponds, so you could walk across them, so they weren't nowhere near like they are today.
Yeah,
So imagining 150 years out, they're gonna be different. The arch sinks for chloride and phosphorus, so would dredging the sediments be desirable?
I could see how that certainly could enhance some, of these benefits. And I mean, these ponds are going to fill in, they have a lifespan, right? All of this we also do in the lens of looking at pond age and how it's related. Not a lot. There seems to be more greenhouse gas over the pond. So certainly you could that dredging and other management, maybe alum additions can affect some of these issues that I've discussed. What do you do with the dredge? And sort of responsible
Ultimate disposal.
thank you.
We could,
And that's something that we continue to do and they're doing it in the art. So there's lots of that opportunity, but it's not I'm sorry, I'm really fumbling. If it's a tool that we're going to use for pond management, or for stormwater management, I hope that we continue to try to design for all of these things holistically in mind and not just for the water storage. That's where I hope we are in 50 years. And I think these ponds, there's either going to be more of them or we're going to have dredged them a bunch of times.
we got a little bit of a chance on Graver Pond since we haven't designed the outlet structure yet, so we can do something for Graver.
Yeah.
I just have I'm sitting here, in my mind, there's a big distinction between something like Confluence Pond or some of the other engineered stormwater ponds that we have around versus Stricker, Tiedemann, and Graber. Those are pothole ponds
Sure.
they were never designed for stormwater management purposes. They were there from geologic times, glacier times. And in my whole career, I hope this doesn't come across wrong, but in Confluence Pond's case, the dirtier that pond is, the more algae, the more phosphorus, the more crap that's in there, the happier I am because it's not downstream. That's the whole point. It was never designed or built to be a wildlife habitat. Now it does serve that function and people love it for that reason, but it is a water quality practice, just like a wastewater treatment plant is.
Sure.
Nobody expects a wastewater clarifier to be a habitat for endangered species or whatever. But and I know it's a hard concept for people. Love having their stormwater. I live mine in front of my house. It's a great looking view. The birds love it. I get to see deer and Kevin's out there taking pictures every day. But it is an engineered water quality practice, and so.
And I think absolutely our focus on triggers and Tiedemann's and this sort of ecological investigation.
Yeah, that's a different animal, I think. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely still receiving a lot of stormwater.
Oh, absolutely. It sure does.
Would it be fair to say retrofitted to receive a lot of stormwater? There's 9 inlets from.
What's that?
9 inlets into Strickers.
Oh, I don't know.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
There's a bunch.
Yeah. So absolutely. Point very well taken.
Yeah.
In particular, I really also think about so Confluence and all those benefits, and the dirtier it is, the way more greenhouse gases that it's contributing. Think about carbon neutrality and our goals, right? So but that doesn't negate the positives as well.
I know.
But I think
it's not easy.
And trying to manage both of those as best we can. And right now, our goal is trying to shed light on which ponds is this the biggest problem and why might it be the biggest problem. If we can understand the mechanism, then we can management happens at the level of mechanism, right? What can we manage into? And so that's also why, our volunteer ponds, and then also what we're doing as a larger part of the program of Steve Hyde is really trying to understand pond design as it relates to, so his group's work has really, I think they're going to have some really exciting recommendations in terms of what pond designs influence different ecosystem services that we expect out of these ponds in terms of phosphorus retention, chloride retention, and turbidity.
Grace, making me think of the Middleton Hills ponds where we've got 3 different distinct areas. With water going into that outer one, then it goes into the center ring where we're starting to get some cattails growing. But then the last area is going into an area that's full of cattails. And that would be impacting using up CO2 and releasing oxygen in that aspect of it. So
For the actively
Yeah.
growing plants, for sure.
So is that a way potentially of enhancing how a stormwater facility would work if it's put into separate areas, sort of like that one?
That's certainly, yeah, and that tiered structure, I assume, would also have an effect on essentially which sort of it's really the sediments that a lot of this is happening,
Well, and
that
that's where they
that
they're
the plant material
dredging
dies.
the
And
outer
yeah,
part and not so much the other two. So
yeah,
that could be a potential design that in the entirety is
Yeah.
doing what we want.
and we have hundreds of experimental units that we've put out there in this landscape. So let's ask those questions.
Go ahead.
As a side note, I've reduced the volume of water that transfers, or the rate at which I transfer from Stricker to Tiedemann's
Oh, cool.
by leaving that valve more closed than open. And I also try not to pump after it's been windy or while windy. And I'm trying to pump more frequently, less volume.
That's really cool. Yeah.
So if that's not the right approach, let me know and I can function differently. I can operate those ponds differently.
Yeah.
The pump from Tiedemann's.
Yeah. I
So
try to
you-
like run it 6 hours, 8 hours.
So you're taking the surface waters off the top then, you think? Or not really?
Probably not early. I don't know how that flows into that. It means a 72-inch intake in the vertical sense.
But you adjust the valve, it's just a gravity valve between Stricker and Tiedemann.
Yep.
But if Stricker gets too high and Tiedemann's low, you'll open it up.
Yeah, it will accelerate the
Yeah.
movement. Yeah, but I haven't needed to.
And high, I mean, from a landowner concern.
Well, I have a bigger concern, which is a DNR concern, which we have to monitor. We have to maintain that at like 1.5 foot
Okay,
different.
okay.
So I try to fall within that window more so. Because that's part of our permit.
Yeah,
You notice the difference in the phosphorus levels that you're pumping out?
I don't, because we're not testing right now, because we're not required.
So we're not paying for phosphorus discharge anymore? That's right.
We are, but it's based on like a 5-year rolling average of what we had pumped and tested the previous 20 years.
So average of phosphorus concentrations and discharge?
kind of low.
And TSS.
Grace, when do you expect to have recommendations and what are you doing about funding?
Yeah. So with the anticipated loss of funding that will be coming into effect in a couple of months, folks that are on the project have graduated, chosen to take early graduation, and thankfully are finding jobs on the market for their skills. So I know that's going to slow our recommendations. I would love to say like 6 months, and I think it's going to be about a year. It's just me and our fantastic volunteer coordinator. And so that's a part of what we're aiming to do, is continuing support for this work. Our volunteer program is well supported because it is pretty low cost. And so we are going to be able, we have confidence to keep that going for at least another year.
So you will be collecting monitoring samples this
Yeah,
year?
volunteer monitors on the 10 ponds will be continuing to collect samples
At
approximately.
least for this year anyway?
what are your prospects for funding from not National Science Foundation?
Yeah, so the budget request to Congress that was developed by by people that have arrived at the National Science Foundation will result in at least a 70% cut into the area that funds our research. There's also the funds they are requesting are to go into 5 research areas only across all of National Science Foundation, which is things like AI, quantum computing, and biotechnology. There's not a obvious path for funding at NSF for ecological and environmental research.
What was your funding or is currently?
All of this is funded through multiple grants from the National Science Foundation.
What's the total?
Our long-term ecological research program, which is really big and supports a lot of people, had been $8 million every 6 years. That said, in maintaining our monitoring, for example, on the Yahara Lakes, we're looking at a ballpark budget and direct costs of about $150K. And so we're
Per year.
Per year?
and so we're actively talking with potential partners and seeking support and seeing if we can pull together a funding portfolio. With regards to that would also provide support for essentially the personnel who also help maintain our volunteer monitoring program. If we can have support for them, we would continue doing this pond monitoring work and support that. We're really committed to our volunteers have given us so much and we want to give back to them. So, and that was a $780,000 grant over 5 years. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to add something to this Middleton Hills pond that we're talking about. So it must have been, I don't know, almost 30 years ago. That area before they built Middleton Hills existed as, since the last ice age or whatever, a sedge type marsh. And then the back part of it was an ephemeral, I think, marsh where it does stay wet most of the year, but the sedge typically dries out in the summer. But they said, okay, well, it'll be a stormwater, rainwater basin, but also we're going to classify it as a wetland. Maybe for funding, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, they dredged the front part of it, these concentric ponds, and made them larger because there's going to be more runoff at 400 homes and the middle pond to handle all the runoff. In the meantime, it was a wonderful job they did because they went in and planted a lot of native species. That makes a difference. We keep the leaves. I mean, the street cleaners are there all the time picking up the leaves, and we stack them up and someone comes by and gets them. So none of those leaves get in the culverts and get into I mean, those are some of the things, even, and it's amazing, you know, it really is amazing, the diversity of wildlife in there, and it pretty much maintains itself. And even with that, about 10 years ago, maybe they had to go in and dredge it.
Mm-hmm.
It was dry. It was a dry year.
There was a dry year.
And so they said, hey, this is an opportunity, and they dredged it, but a lot of lilies grow in there and they just get a lot of organic growth. But it has been successful. You guys have been there longer than I have.
Yeah.
But it's been a very successful program, but it takes some energy and some work to keep it going. You know, we have some rare birds that come in, a black crowned night hare that's in there a couple days ago, but
Yeah. If
Yeah.
you build it, they will come.
yeah,
I'm here
so
to build in that case.
I think it's taken a little bit of energy to keep it at that level, to keep it viable.
Yeah.
Cities dredged it once when it was dredged part of it when it was dry.
Right.
And then about 4 years ago, finished up.
That what it was?
Still
3 to 4,
wet.
I think.
And that's all that's,
Probably,
Oh, that's it?
yeah.
yeah.
I think
I remember that original dredging. That was so dry.
Yeah, that was
We
great.
got in there with bulldozers.
I know.
all the time.
Yeah, I remember.
That was.
That was very, very cheap.
Yeah.
By comparison, I didn't even need a chapter 30 for it.
Yeah.
I called the DNR. They said it's
Water.
dry. Go ahead. Well, we took all what we could.
Cranes were out there grabbing the frogs. Do you remember that?
Salamanders too there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You used to be a salamander.
Population's gone down.
It's,
They dried up in that drought.
yeah, I think
Is
so.
Walking
that
on
what it
that.
was?
Walking on that bed, you could just see them everywhere.
Yeah.
They
They're
used to
just
be a
shriveled
problem
up.
going across the streets.
Weren't smart enough to
People
get to
finding them in window wells.
Sure, blame the salad.
Right. I didn't drain it.
It's disgusting.
A year.
Your point's very well taken about the dirtier.
Yeah, I a little bit of a,
Part of what we've been learning through this is these ponds seem to sort of exist in some different states in terms of what vegetation is there. And the next thing I'm digging into with our data is to try to understand, are those vegetation states related to some of these ecosystem negative consequences services? Because that's something that, while it can still maintain all the wonderful things like you were talking about, if we can think a little bit more, for example, about that vegetation management, we might reduce some of those other harms. And if we're going to keep building these ecosystems, we might want to think about those balances as best we can.
yeah. The other thing to mention, and this is kind of another aside, is that I'm on a committee for DNR they will be proposing a coagulant treatment practice for stormwater ponds for treating, in other words, the phosphorus aluminum-based coagulant treatment, which will be available for cities that want to do it. It's not required, but if they want to, they could install and we're talking about this at Confluence Pond, treat the runoff into the pond before it gets to the pond with an alum-based or aluminum-based coagulant, which would
Maintaining that.
and maintain, yeah, it precipitates out, and the pond is basically a settling chamber, which is what it is.
So you're not adding, it's going to go downstream.
It's not, the design is so it doesn't go downstream. Does that mean it never ever could possibly do that? I can't stay here and they say that, but that's
The storm came along big enough that it would put down.
so the whole idea is to tie up, bind up the phosphorus and then be able to, get the soluble phosphorus would be the big factor that you could additionally
Yeah.
do a better job capturing. Make it not available. Anyway,
And can be fixed.
so.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
Thank you for letting me share. I really appreciate it.
Well.
And thank you for having me, you all that I've heard from you all in the past number of years. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Grace, for,
Great.
we hope to see you back here giving more presentations, okay?
Yes.
And there had been questions about Hillary Dugan's work and whether or not she'd want to present. I mentioned it to her and she's happy if the committee would, or
Okay.
commission would ever like to invite her. But her fluoride work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree.
Good night.
Okay. Any other questions on that?
Got $150,000.
Hmm?
Who's
She's,
got $150,000?
you got money in your
I got
pocket?
money. No, I don't. Not even close.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing.
That doesn't seem like an
Well,
insurmountable.
especially if it's more of a countywide thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just reduces the scale of all of it though.
Yeah, yeah. All right, we are on to number 6, I believe, the press release that was in your packet. Warren maybe should give a little lead into how this came about and what the,
Yeah, it's a little confusing. So as
Yeah.
we discussed last time about the idea of preparing a press release or information brochure, whatever you want to call it, to tell people in the city about success we've had on removing phosphorus and sediment. So I put together a draft like we talked about. And I did send you a copy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what you wanted to do, but just so we wouldn't be accused of
So,
communicating, I didn't do anything.
yeah.
I have some comments on it.
Okay, so that's what we started with, relatively shorter one. Then one thing we also talked about is using the Friends as an outlet, like they did for our getting the stormwater utility fee group. So I talked to Herb Garn, and he reviewed the draft that I sent him, and then he talked to someone in the Friends about doing it in their newsletter in August, and so he enlarged it and enhanced it and added a graph and a few other figures to it because they could handle a larger document than I visualize going on our mailing, our utility
Yeah.
bill, or potentially a press release to Middleton Times. Those are two outlets we talked about. So
The part that you sent me, there's the bottom part that was crossed out. That's what you wrote. Is that correct?
So what happened is that
Yeah.
we got into Luke and Luke sent them out, but what he sent out there was confusion. He sent out is the one that the Friends are going to potentially. And not the
That's
one-
what this is.
The one in the packet is the Friends version.
that's what I saw,
So
just for focus.
here's a version that and I talked to Luke this afternoon and tried to send it to him, but it wasn't going through, so.
And I think, I guess just to make it clear, this is substantially similar, just.
Right,
Couple
it's
of
not
grass.
as long, the grass aren't there.
Basically.
So I don't know where we go from here.
That's why I was confused when I talked to you and you said, no, they're different. 'Cause I received
Yeah,
a letter
we got
from
the-
her as a Friends of Pheasant Branch watershed member. And I thought it was the same and it. Pretty close.
Two-thirds of it are the same.
Yeah,
So the first probably 2/3 are the same, and then the bottom third, he added on more stuff.
well, I'm saying what I had in my packet is closer to what Herb put together.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. That is
That's
the
what I'm
one.
gonna say.
that is
I
the
never
one.
saw this.
And I think the one from the Friends is we could look at it and make a recommendation to the Friends, but
Yeah.
it's just this is what they're gonna do.
Let me make a comment. The email you sent me, there was something that was like this, and then at the bottom, there was a very short, concise, but crossed out version. The short, concise, I think is better for the average citizen.
Mhm.
Yes.
This is way too technical and detailed. Keep in mind, even though we're a well-educated community, very few know this much science. So it needs to be written at high school level.
Eighth grade.
8th grade.
Yeah, there you go.
Recognize Lisa, sorry.
Yeah, No, I totally agree. It's knowing that what we received in our packets is the Friends version of it makes me feel better because
Yeah.
I didn't want to say, wow, great effort, but 4 pages is too
Yeah,
long for a
They
press
can write
release.
wherever they want.
Yeah,
Send out. wherever
Right,
they
so
want.
that's good.
something
And
Yes.
that-
Right.
That will be fine, I think, for the Friends, but and I do think it's an important story to tell about phosphorus, but I would like to see that story told in the context of a bigger story, which is what, that Middleton and this commission are very serious about preventing floods and protecting our water resources. And we do this through stormwater management with funding from our stormwater utility. And that the increased revenues we have now are helping. And I can picture, like an introductory release or a fact sheet that talks about the flood of 2018 being a wake-up call and, I pointing to some needs. And then in a separate one, talk very basically 8th grade level about phosphorus control. This is one of the things we have to do. Another one on chloride, maybe timed before snow season, so people are a little more mindful. And then get into, and I see this over a period of several months, get into on-site management of stormwater and then off-site work that the city does, like through these ponds. So I see it as a bigger package and not,
Multiple things.
yeah,
going
and
on.
not Warren. I want you to be like, whoa, this is a lot of work. We have a communications
That's what I was gonna
person.
say. We have a
And
person that can do
This
this.
is something he should be plugged into and working on, and I'd be happy to.
Can we just sit, my thought, sorry to interrupt you, Lisa.
No, go ahead.
1 or 2 people sit down with that communication director and bounce the idea around and have that person generate.
Jim, that's
Draft.
something I'd be willing to work on because I remember what we did on the initial establishing. I wrote all of that stuff, establishing the utility. And then I did the part because this is when Gary Huth was,
Mhm,
I did the part for the flood.
mhm.
But I think one of the things that we simply need to explain to citizens what all is involved in our stormwater utility. Because when I first took it to council, everyone that lives in the south part of Middleton voted against it. And they're thinking a storm, do you want me to name the names?
No, I'm sure there were 1 or 2 that probably didn't vote against it, but anyway.
It was
Oh, you mean council members?
council
I
members,
thought you meant the referendum.
no, council members.
That
Sorry.
changes the equation.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And they're thinking in terms of stormwater,
Yeah.
storm sewers.
Yeah, yeah.
They aren't thinking of detention ponds in the creek.
But this
Conservative.
council, if I read them right, on this,
They're much better.
they were certainly overall supportive of the increase.
Yeah.
I would read that.
Yeah, I think
My rate.
That was 2018.
Yes, yeah, I know, it's a different set of people.
But I think it's, we've made progress, but I think we do need to explain to people what the utility actually consists of and the federal guidelines and state guidelines that we have to meet.
So I know we've had several avenues for doing this. We've had the videos that come out by that. I've seen
The Middleton
Middleton minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Water ones.
I'm
I
not
know,
sure we
it-
get a lot of
It reaches
hits.
a cut of the population. No, no one way is gonna hit everybody, right?
Water bill.
The water bill is one. I don't.
That's
sometimes
increasingly more difficult.
That gets
Yeah,
logistically
I-
difficult, doesn't it?
Well, and we put stuff in there that is completely ignored.
Of course.
I mean, not even necessarily from the stormwater side of it,
You
but
do the annual
even
report.
public works side.
Yeah,
well,
And
Yeah.
then they just call us. It's
well,
like,
because if you get your bill electronically, which so many people do, I honestly was on sustainability committee and someone said, we're gonna talk about what goes in the utility bill as an insert. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because I just get my bill and pay it. I don't see online, I don't click on anything, just pay. So.
But I still
we-
get,
Yeah, but we have the communications manager is sending out good neighbor news. This would be a little more expansive, but I'm hoping to see good neighbor news become
Water
more
analysis.
expansive, similar to what I do on a
and I
monthly
have.
basis. I think that getting, and again, I'm happy to work on this as well and talk to Brent. And I can, publicize things through my newsletter, and the mayor and the other alders don't do newsletters, so.
yeah. No, I
But the
appreciate your
Times
newsletter.
Tribune would be an opportunity as well.
Right. And again, it can't be, even the
Can't-
Tribune's got to be
right.
a couple columns with a
Can
picture.
it go out
Right.
with the tax bills?
Mm,
I don't think so.
I'm not even sure that's possible.
yeah,
Oh, sure.
Why
But
not?
not possible. Why?
Because you don't, just,
Legality wise, I'm not certain.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's just
Well,
a second sheet with
I
the
wouldn't
tax
want to
bill.
set that precedent.
yeah.
Well, that's a different question.
Yeah, if we start doing that, then we might be like, well, we've got a referendum coming up. Why don't we?
Well,
It does seem
well,
like
no,
a-
that's totally
An
different.
informational piece, though.
Yeah,
We can
but
advocate, but
the other thing is the more paper you throw in there, the more it costs.
Yeah,
It ain't cheap the way it is.
Well, my first thought was, since stormwater utility is paid in the water bill,
yeah,
it seemed like it fits for
Right.
that.
and we
But-
can definitely do it. It's just,
And I don't know physically how they could attach that to the bill. I mean, you can't stuff envelopes. It must be,
We don't, that's all out of house.
it's
are
not,
we getting something at least once a year that has the quality of our drinking water
that's it.
as a sheet?
mhm.
Yeah, it's in
It's
there.
a water bill.
Yeah, and sustainability includes
Yeah.
their.
And
schedule
so
for
couldn't this go with that?
That was my thought.
That's a good idea.
And I mean, I have, it's automatic debit for my water bill, so I do get that.
That seemed like an easy one.
You get the
Yeah.
report, yeah,
I get that report.
yeah, that's required.
And that's one that-
Send that out,
So send it with that water report.
PSC.
So
So,
this was supposed to be a rough draft to.
Yeah.
And work on some here.
Got to be simplified a lot.
yeah, you got the Word version of this, we can work on that. And maybe it's more than one issue, it's not
Yeah.
just a one-shot deal.
Yeah.
Now, along with this, and I know this is not Middleton centric, but the whole Dane County MAM swap group, which we're a part of, and we pay money for them. They're doing information education on general and what you can do to manage, all about this stuff. You go to those meetings
And we share
Yeah.
that stuff.
and we share that, but that's not, I think something targeted toward the stormwater, the Middleton stormwater utility and what it's doing for you is a worthy idea.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the version that we got was a little long and a little wordy and a little higher level than I want to see. Also thought, wasn't quite sure what the lead on it was,
Yeah.
It seemed like it was talking about a variety of things, and certainly I would bring up points that are the essential points up closer to the top. Try to get that out there first.
Herb knows too much about this stuff. That's.
I know.
Guy's a genius, but.
Well, yeah, but
Most of it was written by me and then Herb edited it.
Yeah, if you compare this to that, there's a.
oh, this is a better.
There's a lot of difference there. I'm just saying. God bless the guy. He does a lot of work and he's
Oh, yeah.
stuff. Anyway, the point is, I think we need a PR type
Yes.
level
Mhm.
Yeah.
communication.
Exactly.
So I don't think, is there any recommendation from this topic?
Reach out to Brent and get the.
Can I call him directly or is it
Yeah.
best? And who is that person?
Brent, it's B, well, do you know his phone?
Brent
B-
Henry. I can send you his
Yeah.
email
Do
address.
that. Just say, hey, Brent, this is Jim. He's
Yeah, I'll tell you guys,
he's a chair.
I'll send him an email, copy you, and then
Yeah.
you can get introduced.
That's great. I appreciate that.
I know they're very effective, Paul Ludden, and I wrote an article for Friends of Pheasant Branch on the Eagles. Paul
Yeah,
drafted most of us. We copy edited and I looked at it and, oh, well. And then they gave it to whoever the PR person is.
Friends have a PR person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa, look what they did to this. This is
Buy
brilliant.
it down.
Wait, to
Yeah.
the Friends PR person or
Uh-huh.
ours?
The Friends
Friends,
PR,
yeah.
but I'm just saying what
Yeah.
someone that knows.
They have a
Like,
skill.
holy,
Yes.
this makes us look good. And before it was just, more of a scientific.
Right.
The
I know.
an instructive level.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
what I had.
Well, I think the Friends version is going to proceed on their own.
Absolutely, they can do,
They're
that's,
separate, they're separate.
as long as they aren't,
Level.
I hope it comes out as a Friends publication and a
When I was
Friends article.
teaching.
That's all. It's not a
Right.
Water Resource Commission article.
Right.
I had
Right.
to
It gets
teach
what it's written.
basically a
Yeah.
undergraduate.
Yeah.
level.
I agree with that.
They're focusing on
Yeah.
robotics and whatnot.
Small nuance that probably no one caught is there's a difference in what Todd Suddenbeck says as far
The
as sediment
information
what
clear.
I calculated,
Interesting.
That's.
but that's a small thing.
thing I
Yeah.
would do.
People are going to probably glaze over it anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so that's, anything else on that? We'll at least get the ball rolling and see where that goes. And Richard, I appreciate that.
Started out.
We got fees and lieu discussion. Looks like you guys did a little bit of homework and recommendation here. This is for discussion only.
Not necessarily recommendation, it's more discussion only. I brought up what our current fees are, what a suggested flat rate fee could be per square foot. Payment, and then an example of what a site could look like for what their fees could be.
Has anybody, my biggest concern on this is we started with a fee how many years ago and it hasn't been increased. Just figuring out inflation for each year, what that would be brought up to.
Yeah, so we do a study and I can calculate everything for this
Yeah.
example. But we do have a study that I'm gonna say pulled together on, what the cost of infiltration per square foot is.
No, not inflation.
Yeah, exactly. But they had the costs for 2019 or something like that. So we could extrapolate it from there.
Needs to go way further back than that.
So the cost is based on what it would cost to do inflation at some other site.
Yeah, so it looks at what it would cost to build an infiltration facility or any
Today.
additional one.
In today's dollars.
Yeah, whatever year that study was completed in, is what they use the dollars for, but we could easily translate that to today dollars as well.
Like the one today was $1,500. Could they build something for $1,500 or $1,700?
So.
No.
You couldn't do anything for
Yeah.
$1,700.
No, that's why it was also unique that there was only 7,000 square feet of impervious.
Yeah.
So it was already pretty small. It's like, and this would be like $3,000. It still would have been pretty low.
Well, and it's not intended to,
Be punitive.
but it's not intended to give the city money to build our own facility to, manage the amount of stormwater that would not be covered on that site. It's to contribute to a larger project. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Oh, it has
it's just been,
That's doing. instead of doing, I think our intent was not to, you can't do it here, but we could do it some other
somewhere
place.
else, so
Right,
it
and-
for
right,
building something
And
else.
achieve the same type of benefits at some other site.
Right.
And the amount of money should be the same to do that.
Mhm.
And I think that's where it falls short.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that and
You can't take the example of Valvoline oil this size and say, oh, we're gonna put this over here on this middle of
No,
this
Right.
guy's
but-
yard or something like that. It's
It-
gotta be a consolidated project of some sort. So I understand you can't just
Yeah.
cookie
the
cutter.
other one, since Ken's not here, we used to fund a lot of research projects
Yeah. I know.
that didn't give us any
And-
benefit.
And I guess the other half of this question is, what is our latitude on what that money can be used for? Because
Yeah,
I'd have to go back and
Well, we made some interpretations that, you know,
have stress.
like we did.
Is that right out of
Just-
the ordinance
I
there?
don't know if,
Ken Potter's,
yeah.
I don't know if the highlighted part right there is verbatim what the ordinance says.
A designated fund to be used exclusively for funding future projects that have their primary goal.
So this would be
That's pretty broad.
That's-
Okay. Okay.
the exclusively eliminates a few of these things that are like Ken studies.
I don't know. I'm not so sorry I'd agree with that. It's a study that would help enhance and protect water resources in Middleton.
Have we?
At least, I'm sorry,
Well, the-
that's
Lisa.
So we can look up, what the
Yeah.
exact wording is, and if it's wording we don't agree with, we can always change it. A question specifically about that, Luke, Richard, are you aware of when we last used this fund to pay for something? Like recently? Yeah, okay.
No, I'm Gary was there, certainly.
Yeah, I
Okay.
remember funding
And-
Ken's projects at council level. I
well,
don't
Okay.
remember ever using it for an actual construction of something.
okay, the pond in Lakeview Park, the detention basin was used fees in lieu of money.
Okay.
Not the
that-
Lakeview Pond she was talking about. There's a detention pond.
The upstream.
Somewhere outlet.
Yes.
And was used
Yeah.
for that.
And
Going
that was
further
probably
into
used for that.
Right, and there's
Behind
a,
the field.
right behind
Yeah.
the tennis courts at the
Mhm.
high school, there's a pond.
That's what I thought too.
It was built from that.
This would be good information to gather for a future action. What do we use the fees in lieu
Yeah.
money for?
Yeah.
What we use it for? I had a couple of questions, Luke, about the memo.
Yep.
So on page 78 of the packet, sorry, next time I'll look at the individual docs. But it says fees in lieu apply to all standards that are not being met. But our ordinance, as far as I can tell, currently applies fees in lieu only to infiltration and recharge.
So I guess this is,
It says for any public or private development for which implementation of stormwater management practices as required by this ordinance for infiltration or recharge.
yeah, so I think that's what the ordinance says right
Says.
now. I guess I'm thinking of more future ordinance revisions, so. You're not meeting total suspended solids, you're missing that by 20%. I guess that's where this example kind of comes in. It would either be infiltration or recharge, not doing both. But all of these would have their separate fees in lieu and be totaled up.
So you're basically saying we need to look at the whole thing and. what-
Yeah, so like Valvoline, for example, today, they were meeting their TSS removal requirements, so that would be a 0 right there. But they weren't meeting filtration at all.
Yeah,
But help me out here. I want to make sure I understand because I should know this better. Right now, today, the way it's written,
It's only.
fee in lieu can only be collected for infiltration and
And or recharge.
recharge. So if you're not meeting the peak, the point is you have to meet peak flow, period.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
no exceptions. You have to meet TSS, period, no exceptions.
And that is something I do want to bring up as well. The bolded language here,
Yeah,
making it explicitly clear that this is not to buy out of it.
right. We've had this, yeah.
Yeah, so if they would have to come to the committee here.
Yeah.
We would have to concur that
And
they're.
unfortunately, I think fees in lieu is an easy out for a developer.
Yeah.
And my impression is they go to that because they don't have to do maintenance over years either.
yeah.
All of a sudden, every 2 years, they have to do some kind of a maintenance test to see whether the ponds are working. And and they don't have to do that anymore, so
Mhm.
it's an easy out for them.
Why don't they have to do it anymore?
Well, if they take fees in lieu, of, they don't build upon it.
If the infiltration doesn't exist.
Oh, but if they do, like what we did tonight, granting fees in lieu, there is still a facility that they're,
Not if there's no infiltration facility.
There's
oh,
a
no.
flow control.
Normally, they would have to have a person come in and do a test to make sure it's still working, and that probably costs them 1,000 or 2,000 every couple of years.
And this is just a one-time,
One time.
it's just one time.
One-time thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
The other-
they are getting
They're getting a pretty
big
good deal.
picture. They're
It
getting a
is.
very
So-
good deal.
So I guess that's where to reiterate, if they can be meeting these on site, we will require them to meet the standards on site. There's sometimes you just can't fit it in, you can't get the infiltration, you know, if it's not feasible on the site, then we collect a fee on the back end, rather than just exempting them from the standard.
But I got a comment on that, Luke. My problem with that is MEP. This has been around since I started with DNR in 1979. You know, what does that mean really? Because we have these situations where people propose a apartment complex with 75 parking spaces. Well, how about you just put in 70 parking places and not do 75? Is that, you know, what? And now you got enough space to meet something, or less parking means better chance of meeting something. Where do you draw the line where MEP is? And they say, well, it's not feasible to build apartments with only 60 parking spaces. They got to have 75 or it's not feasible.
Well, I think there's zoning ordinance against that.
Well,
It dictates the number of parking stalls.
Right.
well, there is
So
a
you-
bump up against.
But the plan commission can reduce or eliminate the minimum parking requirement, and maybe that's
Well,
something.
And maybe parking is a bad
Coordination with
example. The
WRs.
footprint of the building
Right,
could be,
okay,
you
sure.
eliminate 5 units that you wanted to
Yep.
have
That's
60
the other
units.
thing is-
Now you only got 50 units.
Right.
And all of a sudden,
And
if the-
put them underground,
Yeah,
under the building.
Well,
as a.
all those
apartment, I say we need more parking units, but you know, that's just.
Well, it happened on that one apartment building that's being constructed now in
Right.
Greenway Center at the corner of Deming Way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Greenway. He came in and wanted fees in lieu of, because he had filled the whole
Thing up.
lot with
Right.
building. He could have made a smaller footprint building and had enough land for infiltration.
I don't know how we're going to solve MEP because you have to have that language in there, I think, legally. I don't think you can get away without having some
Yeah.
technical
Right.
way of getting
And-
out.
And I'm sure state statute
Yeah.
doesn't have guidance.
It's in the DNR stuff.
Where's the line?
No,
You know?
So you can say if you have soils that you can have infiltration, you gotta meet our ordinance. Just like we do with peak flow.
Well, that's kind of
That's kind of
what happened.
the idea.
Yeah.
We can switch the language around, right? So when we do bring the ordinance forward for revisions, we can kind of hash out some of that specific language too.
Yeah, like in a preamble. you know,
Yeah,
to-
some statement that makes the intent.
it's the only infiltratable
And
soil.
that development,
the high end.
the soils weren't good for infiltration. They're right across the street. They have an infiltration basin that works.
Yeah.
Go buy an Fidelity Investments. It's nice looking. So
Mhm.
soils aren't good enough. Like that one, 30 feet away works good.
And,
That's-
okay, so
Could be.
I've seen
Could
that.
be, but I don't believe it.
Another question about the amounts here. So right there in the third, fourth bullet, maybe? Sorry.
This one,
Yeah. No.
Next one?
Yeah, the next one.
rate of 50%.
So there, you refer to current fee is 20 cents per square foot for infiltration recharge and TSS, while peak flow is 0.375 per square foot. Where are those listed? I couldn't.
so it's not listed in the ordinance.
Ah,
That's what I was able to find from, you know, historical.
Okay,
I guess I haven't seen the projects come through
yeah,
myself, but that's what they have been based off of.
Okay.
That have been improved.
all right.
Yes.
And they did have the peak flow of $0.375 too, even though
So
that's not.
those are numbers from like 20
Because I think
years ago.
Eric said that he had
And-
never, we approved the one with the peak flow and then peak flow fees in lieu, and then like immediately we're like, wait.
Right. I'm trying to, I'm scratching my head here because I thought there was no
Fee in lieu of-
a lot fee in lieu of for peak flow.
It could have been that project too that I
Yeah.
was.
That was over by Esther. It's the same project you just
Yeah.
mentioned.
And then the TSS, is that something we even can? I don't want to say waive the standard, but
So that's something again where at times, there's the maximum extent practical that you choose. Generally, you're at 75% and you're not at 80. So then there's an engineering judgment there. But again, that'd be something where they'd have to come to the committee, and we would make that call.
Okay.
And you could always say, we expect you
Yeah.
to just meet the standard.
And then to Warren's point about, by being able to pay the fees in lieu, it absolves the developer of any responsibility for annual maintenance or, every 2 years maintaining an infiltration facility. Can we factor that into the fee? So not just base it on the current construction costs,
Is that
but
something?
what the maintenance costs.
That was included in the MSA.
It was?
MO study, I
Okay.
believe so.
So if someone got fees in lieu of, part of that we could add in that every year they are required to pay us.
Well, they just.
No, I'm talking about
It's like
fee of-
amortization of.
Yeah.
exactly.
But
It would
we-
be
we-
the construction costs and 10
So
years. of
annuity?
It basically just takes, it takes that into account, I don't know, 10 years out, or I can't remember exactly how the memo.
That number would be pretty large, only to
Yeah.
generate $2,000 every couple of years.
So we're collecting it all on the front end.
Yeah, I know,
But
but you might
Yeah.
have to collect $10, $20, $30,000 to do that, at least.
Go back to fidelity.
I think as long as we can justify charging
Right.
for that
You have to have-
amount.
you have to have a basis. for it.
Yeah,
So where's this MSA report? That's,
yeah,
when was
that
this
would be
done?
good to see.
MSA did the first study to determine how much to do for fees in lieu of, and that was probably done 20 years ago.
Could
yeah, I
we see
think there was
that?
an updated one.
Could we see that
Yeah,
or the updated one?
updated one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can prepare.
Just send the link to us.
Yeah.
Eric Thompson's one that did it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
have to think of a new name for fees in lieu.
Get out of jail free.
Mitigation
Mitigation fee.
fee or something like that, because impact fee, I don't know.
Yeah,
Because
impact fee.
fee in lieu just sounds
I know.
much like the buyout that you're.
I
Yeah.
agree.
You know, argument here.
That one on Lakeview.
Non-compliance fee.
That's being contested. I don't know where it stands now,
That's
but
better than fees in
they
lieu.
look at our
Sounds
stormwater
like
ordinance,
they're getting away with
which I bypassed. It says that the money has to be used at some downstream site.
Yeah, I know, we gotta get rid of that.
Yeah.
That was removed.
Yeah, I think it was, yes.
That's out of there.
Was
Okay.
that removed?
That
Yeah,
was removed.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's.
I thought it was changed anywhere in the watershed.
Well, that was our interpretation, and we're in a watershed, but it's not what it
If
said.
we removed that language.
That got
council
taken
did.
out.
Yeah, it might not be reflected in the version that's posted online because those updates take place quarterly.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the online
And then
code,
created,
it says these are the changes
Yeah.
that have been made, but haven't yet been incorporated. But yeah, we definitely.
I remember that, yeah, that was,
Did a lot.
as a result of the brouhaha, yeah. Okay, so,
I had one more question.
yeah, no, fine.
If you go to your example, Luke,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what would the calculation look like if peak rate control wasn't being met?
So, yeah, I don't know if I had that up
I
here.
think you said there'd be no prorating.
Basically, it's a 1 or a 0. It's
It's
binary.
1 or 0.
So 100% or 0%.
So if they weren't meeting it, they'd be paying,
The 21,780
Yeah,
would
okay.
appear as well.
all right, thank
I
you.
mean, it's too bad that we used to get fees in lieu of money for peak flow,
Mhm.
and that collected quite a bit of money.
Yeah, and this way
But it's a state law, and you can't do that.
it is.
I'm not
I
sure.
don't,
Oh, okay, so I'm not sure.
I'm not following this conversation, because I'm hearing, I thought 5 minutes ago, we said that you have to meet those two criteria. There is no fee in lieu of or any other language you want to use for not meeting them.
I was saying initially, you could use fees in lieu of for not meeting the peak flow.
But-
And there is some justification for accepting money for peak flow if you're
I know.
in a watershed.
I know.
If you're down.
You're next to Lake Mendota, if you're like,
Because that's not causing the flood, you take the money and put it upstream where you can do some good.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense if you're next to Lake Mendota to manage peak flow.
No.
It doesn't, you're not protecting anything, you know? But anyway, so sorry to belabor this, but what is it today? Tell me what the policy is.
So today the policy is this 20 cents per square foot for infiltration and recharge,
Yeah,
peak flow 0.375.
so we are saying,
It is. Generally, I guess this is my approach. If there's any way that they can meet peak flow, I would expect them to meet.
yeah,
Like, I wouldn't.
right.
Does that include downsizing the project?
It depends on what the project is. So every site is different. Topography is different, soils are different. It all kind of depends. So I think having that there is a catch-all. So if they get to 70% or something, or 75%, it gives them, or they almost get to that peak flow standard. It gives them that incentive to
Close the gap.
close the gap.
So you're saying we can collect fees in lieu of for peak flow?
At this point, I'm not sure. This is going off of I assume I was looking at the same project that had been approved previously.
Okay,
So I was just looking at what we had done,
okay.
is all that is.
Okay, so let's clarify that in fact is the case, one way or the other. Whatever we would cite, whatever source document you could cite is be helpful. The next question is going to be, and we're not going to resolve this tonight, is all these calculations, especially when it comes to flow for the 100-year storm, and you got to meet it, and it's got to be 99.68 CFS is your target, and you're at 99.43, or not, I'm sorry, 99.89, right? We all know these calculations have a huge range of precision. I don't have an answer to say nearest whole CFS, nearest 5 CFS, if you're talking about, the 100-year storm or the 200-year storm. If we just be a lot cleaner if we had an answer to that question.
That's a good thing to follow up on, because I would be in favor of, pushing the envelope a little bit and doing what is legally permissible and most protective for, property owners in Middleton.
There are some cities or states that, their air bars in any kind of a 100-year flood, and they're 10%, and some enforce the higher 100-year floods plus air, standard air, that's of an extra 10%. So it's not maybe 1,000, it's 1,100. So they take the more conservative approach.
Yeah.
Say, hey, if we're going to err, we're going to err on the high side.
Yeah. Something tells me.
But when you have a developer come to the city council and say, I need to pay 50,000 in, call it what you want, fee in lieu, because of one tenth of a CFS calculation.
Well, we haven't had anyone do it
No,
since I've been on council. In fact, if anything, we've had the opposite, where people are coming and saying,
they didn't mean
don't let this development go through because it didn't meet whatever the.
Yeah.
I do think rounding seems like maybe we should be able to round up to the nearest $10 or the nearest 100.
Yeah.
Because those cents, that's kind of.
One of the interesting things we had over the years, Ryan Brooks, the developer of Fox Ridge, was on our committee for years. And we had a perspective from a developer, which I thought was really good. Ron was a good guy. He had good common sense, but he also was very protective of a developer standpoint. And he kind of made us look at reality too. And he looked at reality. And so I think it was very helpful to have that type of expertise in our committee.
Yeah.
It's hard to come by.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right. This is a discussion only, I believe, right?
Yes.
We have discussed it. Request is for whatever source document you can find on validating the rates and which components are or are not eligible for I'll use the word fee in lieu of for now, but.
Okay.
And should know this too, somewhere, is that all codified in the ordinance, or is there another document that describes this?
The fees,
With the policy,
it's in the ordinance.
it's all.
And it, I hope, will be more
We just changed the ordinance once.
stated in the ordinance, because I think the fees part is like in two different sections,
Yeah,
which,
we just,
I think this one tripped us up before, though.
yeah, it probably made sense when it was,
I guess to point out, the ordinance says the fee is to be determined by,
yep, the actual fee number.
yeah.
Yes, but what is eligible for the fee would be,
That's, I think it
that's in the ordinance, and then
Do we have the fee numbers and like, a fee schedule?
we have that in a separate document.
it should be in the
Just keeping those
city's,
file.
it should be in the city's overall fee schedule.
Right.
I
So
think,
you-
and I don't think it is.
That's part of what I was
Yeah,
bringing up the fees in lieu for, is I'd like to build it into the ordinance
Yeah.
to have something there.
yeah, our stormwater utility fee, I think, is in there, but I think it should be,
So when a developer asks.
you would like to have a dollar amount in the ordinance, is that what you're saying?
the
Uh,
rate.
The rate.
Well, that's what I mean,
Yeah.
the rate per square foot.
Yeah, but you want to change it, you want to change the ordinance. It's easier to change this fee schedule.
Yeah.
Right,
Much
We
easier.
could do that as well.
Yeah.
right.
We can go either way.
Yeah, that's where the,
Well, you have something to show. That's
That's the
you
whole
want
idea.
clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the
You
fee-
can keep the fee schedule online and
Yes.
update it
Right.
as needed.
Not quite, but yes,
Yeah.
as needed.
And then if you could, again, I know you got all the time in the world here. Find that MSA document just to, so we know there's a source of information that we base this all on.
Sounds good. Yeah. I can do
I
that.
appreciate that. Anything else on that topic? On to the preliminary budget discussion only?
So this item, I just wanted to bring up the capital improvements plan that we have. This is what Eric had set before he left this position. If there was anything, high level that you wanted to change or to look at before we have the budget discussions, in the coming months. If there's any projects that you think should be a priority.
One question I had was on the confluence fund dredging, you got it down to 2034, something like that.
That's what it is at right now.
And I think the last meeting you talked about, we actually got information on the amount of sediment in confluence pond and south pond.
Chuck was working on, it. That's been fully completed yet.
Yeah, it seems like it's pretty hard to put a date on.
Yeah.
It should be based on accumulation of sediment and,
Yeah.
And it was dredged before the flood, right?
yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. We don't remove it. It's in the we trap it and it's not removed from the watershed until we dredge it and.
Mhm.
You're somebody else.
yeah.
Yeah, you take that shit.
Spot where it's supposed to be removed.
I wondered why it's proposed to expand confluence pond before dredging it,
I think Eric's thing was to do it at the same time.
not according to.
So my understanding,
And I'm
is that
sorry,
the ex-
can you zoom in? 'Cause
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
Super.
Can you make that, we don't need to see ourselves, do we? Make it up. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
my understanding is that the expansion would also include a dredging.
Oh, okay,
So it
so that's a separate.
would be
dredging?
2030 and then 2034.
Got it, okay.
My understanding.
My question is, under 2025, is this a reasonable and doable list of projects that can get done this year? We're already halfway through 2025.
So right now, I guess Rich just sent out the RFPs for, or RFPs for, RFPs for Misty Valley and Hidden Oaks. We're looking to do those constructions next year, so these two projects right now are on
track.
schedule.
Okay,
Um,
is that just design then, this year?
Yep.
Design fees, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Yep. Spring Hill and Middleton Hills Southeast, both of those are going out to bid in,
No, okay.
couple weeks are going out to bid. Hopefully
And-
get done this fall.
And are those,
What's the scope of that work? Just curious.
Yeah, so there's sediment accumulation in these basins. Basically going in and taking them back out to grade. I don't think for either of these projects, there's any sort of outlet modification, any structural modification.
some landscaping,
Just
Get rid of the sediment.
grading and landscape.
and there's some landscaping, yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't have a contractor quote yet, or bid, we got an engineer's estimate for those numbers right now.
You've got a design.
Yeah, you got a design.
And the estimate from the design engineer, I believe, was right in line with what
Okay.
we had, pretty close.
And tell me what needs to be done for down the pond. It's kind of too bad because it's just seems like we're always doing something down.
So down a pond, Jeff, our utility foreman's out there right now, not right now, but
Yeah.
out there currently building up the banks, you know, where those trails are.
Oh,
But that's the main issue, is that the elevations of those
it's
are
settled.
not proper. Yeah, they either weren't built properly or they settled over time.
Isn't that the pond that we rebuilt in
Yes.
flood?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's where.
And that's,
But we did pay money to get that rebuilt back to specs,
yeah,
and we don't have any problem with how it was done apparently, right?
Which one are you talking about?
Behind the police station?
Oh, okay, Donna.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well-
I put you on the hot seat, Richard.
No, no, definitely not. That pond I don't think was built to spec. And I think.
Rebuild or the,
Yeah, and I think the chasing back of the contractor, the construction observer, was fruitless.
went as far as it could go.
I think it would have spent more chasing it than
Right.
what you'd have gotten out of it.
So this is for redesign or this is construction.
Yeah, it's-
just construction.
So we're using the city staff to do that then to just,
Yeah,
Field?
we're having Jeff Madigan, the utility foreman, do that.
I think at last count we were about $12,000 or $14,000 with material and labor and fuel, and so we're under that by a little bit.
well,
remember.
that pond wasn't rebuilt back to the original
it
specification.
was
There was some
redesigned.
it's a new design, right?
It was a redesign, and I don't know if some of that is sitting on sand, so I don't know if that's some of that settled in the
Yeah.
process.
Mhm.
You know, after post construction settlement. We don't know for sure, but in a general survey of it, we're
You can
manipulating
see.
a little differently. If we moved the casting and a lid and dropped the intake from the dry pond to the south to aid in that functionality. It doesn't overtop
Mhm.
the emergency weir,
That's a scary.
which is also the path, right?
Yeah.
So.
And there's, oh, I was just gonna ask, there's a path back there too.
Yeah.
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 They're.
I've never
it's
been
A
back.
wet pond and then a bioretention basin, the path kind of snakes through.
I had a question. So the deferred maintenance projects will be done in 2030? Is that correct?
That's when we're hoping to be caught up.
Yeah, that's what I
Basically
mean.
caught up.
And then I was gonna ask what will ongoing
Yeah.
maintenance costs look like from that point forward?
I don't know that we know that. yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one.
Sure, no, that's good. I just remember it was gonna be something like
There
a,
will be numbers in those years.
Yeah,
Numbers.
this is just a snapshot of right now.
Yeah.
Well, now that we actually have staff
right, and,
gaining equipment,
yep, that's good.
things
See?
are
Yeah.
gonna progress.
Another success story,
Like you saw on the culvert at
right,
UW Health Court.
yep.
Mhm.
So relocating the Confluence Pond dredging spoils, explain that project.
So I don't have a ton of background on it. My understanding is that there is likely arsenic in those soils
Oh.
that we'll have to pay to either remediate them, dispose of them, have them tested. I think that's just kind of a high estimate with a large contingency included.
Okay,
Been avoided for a long time.
Yeah,
Is
That
that
is
naturally occurring or human?
I believe it's naturally.
Just natural.
But it depends. I think DNR doesn't really care
They don't-
depending on the, you know,
And I think it was just slightly above the max.
yeah.
good.
So it depends on what dried out soils now look like that have been stockpiled.
And right now that's sitting on private property, right? Still.
No, it's on public property.
Mhm.
We bought a little piece from the Pleasant Company where the bags were stored.
Okay.
We're not gonna remove them, we're just gonna do something with them.
Well, we're probably gonna need to remove them because we'll need that space to re-dredge.
So what we're gonna do.
Well, that's what we gotta figure out.
That's part of the large contingency that's.
I mean, they have arsenic still there.
We don't know.
We have to test it.
We're gonna,
I'm sure it's probably gone up as they've dried out.
I don't know how that works.
Not sure.
That would concentrate it.
And then the Misty Valley stormwater system, I have a lot of constituents who are very concerned, as you know, about the mowing that takes place, and they're likewise going to be concerned about wildlife being protected and the timing of that project not, or being timed if possible,
Yeah.
so as to avoid critical times in development. Grace's comment about amphibian relocation caught mine. I probably have not that many amphibians living in those ponds because they're not always wet, but just please be sensitive to the folks who view that as a
They're preserved, right?
Wildlife
They're,
preserve,
they're
exactly.
private wildlife.
Yep.
preserve.
And then looking at the flood reduction project, I know it's TBD, but do you have any thoughts?
Which one is that?
It's the very last one at the bottom of
Oh, I
stormwater
got it.
improvements.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would assume that is looking upstream north on the north branch.
North Fork. Oh, okay.
That's what I would assume it is. I don't think there's anything really nailed down for it.
Yeah.
There's a couple sites that were crossed out that weren't gonna work.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't have any.
Okay, yeah, sure. Like I said, I know it's TBD, but just was wondering. And then I'm wondering about the Graber Greenway project, because it would be nice to be able to pencil that in as a TBD somewhere
Yeah.
in the hope that we will be able to go forward with.
So Rich and I are gonna be meeting with Strand
Okay.
or MSA, not Strand. I think next week in a couple weeks, just regarding that project. Part of that project was the rehabilitation of Misty Valley's stormwater system.
Okay,
So since that's already going up for RFP, my thought is we will take that item out of that proposal contract rather than duplicating work there. That's mainly where that's at. I haven't really had time to review what MSA has put forward. I know there was a contract amendment approved in November, I believe.
You approved MSA to do a more comprehensive analysis. That did not include the design work at Misty Valley?
It didn't include design work at Misty Valley. It
Just-
included $8,000, $10,000 to look at soils and
Conceptual.
feasibilities, should be.
well, and the Graber Pond outlet was another part.
That is part of it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's, well, High Road reconstruction is on the calendar for 27 now. That was another chunk of it.
Design next year and.
Yeah, and then
Construction the following.
there's potentially some movement on that outlet too. See, in
Okay.
north of Pheasant Branch Ridge.
Oh. Okay.
So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is it would be great to include that as a future TBD to finish the rest of it, or, you know, to do the analysis of the full system.
We really didn't modify this at all for this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what was approved basically last year.
Yep.
So we just wanted to get something in front of you to have a discussion about, but we can add in those items certainly.
So when we do have the budget discussions, we'll have a new plan set forward.
Great.
So MSA is going ahead with the outlet design right now.
We are meeting with them to just confirm where things are at.
Okay.
As of right now, I don't think they're doing anything on that. We have the 90% plans for the outlet designs. So I doubt they're gonna significantly change. They're probably right at the finish line on that stuff. For that portion of the Greenway project.
Right, pulling those two pieces out will change the scope and hopefully we can do that in segments.
Any other questions on the budget? Discussion only.
Yeah, that's great. Now that really involves the operation, how we're gonna operate Graber Pond, not just the outlet design, so it has to include both. That's a critical thing.
It does include routing through Misty
And
Valley.
we've talked about it numerous times.
Mhm.
And going around there.
I made sure nobody was totally happy. Yeah.
I guess part of what I'll bring up for the Misty Valley and Hidden Oaks specifically is the intent is to convert at least some of the parts of the basin to bioretention facilities that won't have to have extensive maintenance. They might get mowed once a year,
Mm.
but in general, they'll have mulch and then plant plugs. And the less you touch them sometimes, the better. So.
These are all capital improvement projects, sort of, our storm utility fee money is not gonna be used for any of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sound
Oh,
like
yeah, this
maintenance.
is, this is all stormwater utility,
Yeah,
right?
it's all
Yeah,
stuff.
it's not water utility.
But it's called, it's not the capital improvement funds.
Well,
So,
Well, the capital is whether isn't necessarily the funding source. So it isn't necessarily that we're going out for borrowing for that capital project, but because of its size and dollar amount, they just call it a capital improvement.
Okay.
it's not operations.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Right.
Where does our monitoring expense come in? It's not considered capital improvements, right? So it's part of your operating
Operating.
budget,
Oh, yeah,
like the USGS monitoring.
right. So that, we're gonna have to talk about that.
So right now, that's funded through
Did,
TID,
yeah.
so
oh,
I think it'll be moved over to stormwater utility is the idea.
yeah, the TID's out this year.
September.
September.
Yeah,
They were gonna move the North Fork and South Fork monitoring. But the other one was part of the operating
I
budget.
thought so too. The main station on the main.
Yeah.
main
I
station.
think that's,
The one in Farmer was part of the operating budget and the other two were covered by TIF funding.
So it makes sense.
And they talked about moving those into the stormwater utility.
Yep.
That makes sense.
that'll come through as probably a budget request unless something different happens
Well,
with other funding.
when you looked at what Todd presented, he talked about getting funding for the project for operation of gateway stations. We're funding one that's as part of that project. It seems like we ought to be talking to Madison Met about, or someone, about why aren't we being included in that? We're paying double. We're paying for funding on Doran Creek and Yahara River to help with other people, and then we're paying for our own on North.
We got
Yeah.
any kickback from the other side on that, you know.
Yeah.
Part of that might have to do with the intergovernmental agreement that we should be writing, certainly for Strickers. Which I know that they're rebuilding the 4 bay soon. On Strickers on the south end of Strickers.
Because they're opening up the culverts, we've talked about maybe them helping out the monitoring of flow on the South Fork. Since
Yeah, but the city of Madison, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about the city of Madison.
City of Madison.
Yeah,
And they may be willing to do that, seem they're pretty willing with going along with any recommendations we have. You give them a bill for.
it's easy, yeah, it's easy to say, it's easy to say, we'll take care of it, and, yeah.
Have you seen that facility they're building on?
Yeah, I have, yeah, it's
Like it might.
pretty massive.
I guess regarding the intergovernmental agreement, I haven't really seen anything in our files. Other than just some pretty high level discussions.
Yeah,
Yeah, right, that's where it was.
back burner. Yeah. All right, anything else on budget here? Comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. Future meetings, we've got a couple things there. I think the fee and lieu is still gonna be a future meeting topic. Along with all the stuff we asked you for. There's something else we had
Well,
up tonight?
I think the minutes said discussion of road salt impact on water. wells,
Yeah, yeah.
updates to amendment.
I meant in addition to this.
What about the flood maps? What's this? Can we get a status on those? Because it seems like instead of having to one by one let developers in a certain area know, be aware, this might be coming.
I have Steve Gaffield from
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
my question on that, I think Steve, he's got the numbers, we have the maps, we have what we have. My recommendation or discussion would be, do we need to come up with a formal way to inform developers when they first are proposing a development to know what these numbers are for informational purposes only? Rather than waiting till they come with a stormwater management plan, we say, oh, by the way, those flood numbers you got there are, yes, they're the regulatory ones and they're the ones you got to comply with, but you need to know this too.
Yeah.
So my point is there a way that we want and can we, without breaking any rules, formally put that into the site plan development process?
That's something I can check.
Could it be part of the stormwater ordinance? We're talking about, like, we put a reference in there to those on site.
We'd have to talk to the lawyers about that.
Yeah.
But then I'm nervous about making those numbers,
FEMA.
not a FEMA number.
Yeah. And I think the answer is probably no.
But is there a more informal way that we can at least let people know what's going on, what we have information on?
Yes. My thoughts are that I can let them know if they're near Pleasant Branch or one of the any sort of waterway.
And if that's part of your routine review or input process, that's great. And you just say, oh, by the way, here's the numbers that we have for our latest modeling.
We could do that.
So we don't need a council.
Yeah.
I mean, I think planning may want to know this is going on. Somebody comes to
Well,
plan.
I don't want to get too much into a discussion of an item that wasn't.
Yeah, I guess, okay.
Yeah, but.
That's
in the
why-
future, we should talk about that
Future.
because there might be an opportunity through the zoning code.
Yeah.
Have an overlay, so. We can
Yeah,
talk about that.
I think that's typically where it's been addressed.
So I would like to make it an agenda topic, so.
I guess that is one thing I'll bring up too. I've been trying to work with planning to get engineering involved earlier. So it seems like we haven't been, and that's when issues arise.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
And that's a real good
I
idea.
used to work with Verona, we were looking at stuff right.
Yeah.
So.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else for the code?
Lower rate levels in the wells you mentioned about.
Yeah, so I could have Mike Meyer come to one of our future meetings, talk about that and then some other drinking water related topics.
So I don't know if everybody got that email about Parkinson's disease being linked to golf courses.
No, I did not.
There's a study that was published in the Journal of Medicine done by Mayo Clinic, and they found that, and they looked at golf courses in western Wisconsin and southern Minnesota, and found that there's 130% increase in Parkinson's disease if you're located within 3 miles of a golf course.
Wow.
Who's not located with 3 miles?
Reason
Well, probably they didn't.
They didn't have,
So
they
that's-
couldn't have
that's-
done
they said
factors.
Most
They
urban
inferred
areas.
pesticides.
Okay.
They didn't come out and say it was pesticides.
Well, but there's pesticides used on a lot of things beside golf courses.
I didn't get whatever the message was.
Yeah, I didn't see
Can you
I didn't
send
see
that?
Send it out again.
Yeah,
I had a hard
Or send
time
it to the
because link
loop.
didn't go, so there's supposed to be a clickable link on there. Right?
no, I
It didn't.
didn't,
We
I
didn't get
didn't
it.
get a message. Send, pass it on
I
to
don't-
Luke and.
My recommendation is you send it to Rich or
I know, that's why I
Loop.
tried to do it.
You tried to send it to me earlier and I.
the art. It's just an article, right?
Well, I referred to you as Stormwater Magazine.
Yeah.
I Googled it.
It wasn't
They
the
came up
Stormwater.
with a study, actually, a better one,
Okay,
the actual link
okay,
study, not just a quote from Stormwater Magazine.
that's good. I'd like to see that.
It looks like it was a good study, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
we're off topic. We got, meeting is adjourned.
We
Okay,
have to,
okay, meeting's adjourned. I just declared that.
Okay.
there are those 2 wells that are encased that have high chloride levels are right in that area. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, where's, oh, there.